Tonight, let me take you back in time to a city that never slept, a city that bustled with noise and dreams, New York City, in the year 1888. But on one fateful week, the city that prided itself on progress and energy fell silent beneath a storm so fierce it seemed as though the heavens themselves had conspired to bury it in snow and ice. The Great Blizzard of 1888 was not just a storm. It was a test of endurance, a story of survival, and a quiet reminder of how fragile human life can be in the face of nature's unyielding power. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome you, whether you are listening from the United States, Europe, Asia, Africa, or any corner of the world. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Maybe it's late at night where you are and you're preparing to drift into sleep. Or perhaps the morning sun is just rising and you've chosen this story to carry you gently into your day. If you're new here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps more dreamers find their way to these calming tales. Now, before we return to 1888, take a moment to settle yourself. Adjust your pillow, pull the blanket closer, and let your breath fall into a slow, steady rhythm. With each inhale, imagine gathering warmth. With each exhale, release the weight of the day. You are safe, you are calm, and this story is here to guide you into a restful night. And now let us step softly into the streets of New York, as the first flakes of the Great Blizzard begin to fall. The morning of March 11th, 1888, began with an innocent quiet. Over the rooftops of Manhattan, a pale sky stretched without promise, tinged with a silver haze that hinted of change. Few noticed it at first, the way the air carried a sharp bite, or how the breeze tugged at coats and scarves a little more urgently than usual. Street vendors were already calling out their wares. The bells of horse-drawn trolleys clanged down Broadway, and the city hummed with its usual restless rhythm. But then came the first snowflakes, small, delicate, and almost playful as they drifted down from the sky. A newsboy paused to watch them, holding his bundle of papers beneath one arm. A young woman carrying a basket of groceries smiled as a flake landed on her glove and melted instantly. No one yet suspected the storm that would follow. As the hours passed, those snowflakes multiplied. They danced and swirled, carried by winds that grew more insistent. The streets began to wear a thin veil of white, coating cobblestones, carriage wheels, and the iron railings of brownstone steps. Shopkeepers brushed at their thresholds with little concern, and children laughed as they kicked the gathering drifts. Still, there was something in the air, something that did not laugh. The Hudson River had turned a darker shade, ripples whipped by a strengthening wind. Seagulls wheeled low, their cries sharper than usual, as though warning of something unseen, and those who paused long enough to truly feel the cold realized it had grown deeper, sharper, as though it carried with it a promise of endurance far beyond a passing flurry. By afternoon, the snow was steady, relentless, and the voices of the city grew muffled beneath its curtain. The trolley bells sounded distant now, wrapped in white silence. Horses bowed their heads against the wind. And though life continued, there was a subtle unease in the air, a whisper that this was no ordinary snow. As the afternoon deepened, the snow pressed harder upon the city. What had begun as a playful scattering of flakes grew into thick, relentless curtains of white, falling with a purpose that could no longer be ignored. The air was heavy with it, so dense that the outlines of familiar streets blurred and softened, as though a veil had been drawn across the city's face. Along Broadway, carriages struggled to keep pace. The sound of horses' hooves on the cobblestones was muted, their iron shoes striking against stone with a dull thud instead of the usual sharp clatter. The animals, proud creatures that they were, tossed their heads in agitation, their breath rising in plumes of frost that quickly dissolved into the snowy air. Drivers hunched into their coats, shouting above the wind, their voices lost before they reached the ears they were meant for. Inside the homes that lined the avenues, families pressed closer to their fires. The scent of burning coal and wood clung to the streets, mingling with the sharpness of the storm. Windows fogged over with warmth, turning the glow of lamplight into faint golden smudges against the white. Mothers checked their cupboards, considering how long the food would last if the weather worsened. Children, at first delighted, pressed their noses to the glass to watch the snow pile higher, their excitement slowly giving way to unease as the day grew darker. The silence was growing, a peculiar silence that comes only with great snowstorms, where sound is swallowed by the thickness of the air, and even the clamor of the city seems softened into a muffled hum. A man walking home from work paused at a corner, looking around at streets that should have been alive with people. Instead, shapes moved like shadows through the swirling white, their outlines blurred, their footsteps faint. He pulled his scarf higher, the wool stiff with frost, and pressed forward. In the harbor, ships rocked uneasily against their moorings. The East River, dark and restless, hissed where chunks of ice collided against its edges. Sailors fastened ropes tighter, their boots slipping on icy planks, while the snow coated sails and rigging until they sagged beneath the weight. Even the gulls had retreated, their cries swallowed by the storm's growing voice. By evening, the storm had claimed the city in full. The streets were no longer simply coated, they were buried, the snow rising against doors and sweeping across rooftops. The wind now howled between the buildings, finding cracks and corners to whistle through like a ghostly choir. Those caught outside fought for every step, their clothing heavy with wetness, their faces stung raw by the icy blasts, and in that gathering silence one truth began to dawn. This was no passing flurry. This was something greater, something vast, and it had only just begun. By the time night began to creep over New York, the streets themselves seemed to vanish. What had once been sharp lines of cobblestone avenues and orderly sidewalks dissolved beneath sweeping drifts of snow. Lamps flickered along the thoroughfares, their glass globes haloed in white, their weak glow swallowed almost instantly by the storm's breath. Shadows of people moved like ghosts, their figures barely visible, cloaked in a blur of white powder. Men bent forward into the gale, clutching their hats against the wind's clawing hands. Women hurried with shawls wrapped tight around their faces, baskets of food pressed against their chests as they tried to reach home before the storm grew worse. Even the children who earlier had delighted in the snow had vanished indoors, leaving the playgrounds and stoops eerily empty. The snow thickened until it was difficult to tell where the road ended and the buildings began. Step by step, the familiar city was being erased, replaced by a strange new world, one of swirling whiteness, silence, and unrelenting cold. Those who peered from windows no longer recognized their streets, their neighbors' doorsteps hidden, the lines of fences and railings lost beneath the drift. The sound of wheels had nearly vanished. Carriages had given up their fight, horses shivering and stamping their hooves as drivers led them to whatever shelter could be found. The clanging of trolley bells, usually so constant, so reliable, was gone, silenced by snow too deep for rails to hold. And so the city, once alive with noise, dimmed into a hush, as though it had slipped into a dream. Across the city, countless travelers found themselves stranded. The storm had arrived faster than many expected, catching workers as they tried to return from factories, offices, and shops. Bridges became nearly impassable, their planks slick with ice, and their railings buried in snow. Ferries at the harbor rocked dangerously, their decks coated in frost, while the Hudson and East Rivers began to choke with floating ice. Men in heavy coats gathered at ferry stations, stamping their feet for warmth, watching as captains shook their heads and refused to risk the waters. Some tried to walk the distance home, only to be turned back by winds so sharp they cut like knives across their faces. Women, clutching children by the hand, sought refuge in churches and hotels when their journeys grew impossible. Inside the railway terminals, benches filled with weary travelers, coal stoves struggled to keep the waiting rooms warm, and the air inside was thick with the mingling smells of damp wool, coal smoke, and fear. People exchanged whispers, wondering how long the storm might last, each telling themselves it would surely ease by morning. Yet outside the windows the snow only thickened, whirling faster and higher, as if determined to trap the city in place. For many there was no way forward. The blizzard had turned the simple act of getting home into a test of endurance, and the city's great arteries of movement, its ferries, its trains, its streetcars, had fallen silent beneath the weight of winter's hand. If the snow was relentless, the wind was merciless. By nightfall, it roared through the city streets like a living beast. It tore shingles from rooftops, rattled shutters against windows, and sent loose objects skittering across frozen roads. Chimneys groaned as smoke was sucked backward into fireplaces, filling some homes with choking fumes. The sound of it was unearthly. It wailed between buildings, low and mournful one moment, shrieking like a scream the next. People indoors huddled closer to their stoves, pulling blankets over their shoulders, flinching each time a gust slammed against their walls. Outside, those caught in the storm leaned forward at impossible angles, their bodies bent against the force, their coats snapping like sails in a gale. The snow, driven by that wind, cut into exposed skin like glass. Eyes watered, cheeks burned, and lips split from the cold. Drifts grew into towering mounds, swallowing staircases, burying fences, and pressing against doors. In some alleys, the snow rose higher than a man's waist, trapping anyone who dared to wander too far from shelter. And still, the city endured. Lights glowed faintly in windows, stubborn beacons against the dark. Fires crackled in hearths, even as woodpiles shrank and coal supplies dwindled. Families spoke in low voices, reassuring one another, though every gust of wind reminded them of their vulnerability. The storm was not a visitor passing through. It was a conqueror, laying claim to every street, every rooftop, every life caught in its path. The city had always thrived on its lights, gas lamps glowing along the avenues, shop windows flickering with candles, the faint orange halos from coal stoves spilling into the night. But on this storm-racked evening, those lights seemed frail, swallowed almost instantly by the blizzard's breath. From the high windows of tenements, residents peered into a world that no longer looked like New York at all, but like some strange and endless wilderness of white. The streets below had disappeared entirely. Where once there were carriages, where once there were hurried pedestrians and clattering trolleys, now there was only a shifting, restless expanse of snow. The lamps lining the avenues glowed dimly through the storm, their halos blurred into soft globes, making them look less like lights and more like pale, ghostly moons drifting at street level. Between them, shapes moved and vanished, the hunched silhouettes of men staggering toward shelter, the fleeting figure of a woman clutching her shawl, the faintest shadow of a dog weaving between snowdrifts. Every step taken outside was a struggle. Boots sank deep, crunching into snow that reached up past ankles, past calves, sometimes higher. The sound was muffled, as though each step was swallowed by the earth itself. The air had a sharpness that caught in the throat, every breath searing the lungs with ice. The snow did not fall gently, it stung. Each flake, carried by the gale, struck the skin like a needle. Faces turned raw, lips cracked and bled. Eyes streamed tears that froze almost instantly at their corners. Inside the homes, the storm made itself known with each gust that rattled the windows. Curtains fluttered though the glass was shut tight. Doors trembled in their frames. The wind whistled through keyholes like a chorus of invisible flutes. Families huddled close together, blankets layered over shoulders. Children nestled against their parents' sides. The glow of the fire painted their faces in warm amber light, though the heat never seemed enough to push back the cold that seeped from every wall, every crack, every corner. Food was a growing concern already. Bread had gone hard by evening, its crust thick and dry from sitting too long. Potatoes, stored in baskets, were pulled close to the fire so they would not freeze. A kettle of water set upon the stove rattled and steamed, its hiss a constant reminder of warmth. The taste of smoke lingered on the tongue, for the chimneys, clogged with ice, pushed fumes back into the rooms. It made eyes sting, and yet no one dared let the fire go out. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. Normally, one could hear the faint rumble of the harbor, the clop of horses on distant streets, the laughter or shouting of neighbors carried through the night air. But now there was only the storm, the deep, endless roar of the wind and the soft, continuous hush of snow burying all beneath it. From the tallest rooftops to the narrowest alleys, it blanketed everything, erasing lines, softening edges, covering the world in white shadows. And in that silence, broken only by the storm's voice, the people of New York began to understand the truth. They were not merely caught in a snowstorm. They were at the mercy of something vast, something that stretched beyond the limits of their control. Nature had drawn its curtain over the city, and there was no telling when it would rise again. Down by the waterfront, the storm's cruelty was felt with a different kind of weight. The harbor, usually alive with motion, the creak of timbers, the splash of waves against the piers, the shouts of sailors hauling ropes, was now muted, its heartbeat slowed beneath the ice and snow. The East River had grown treacherous. Sheets of ice drifted across its black waters, colliding with a hollow clink like glass shattering in the distance. The wind raced down from the north, sweeping across the surface, lifting sprays of frozen mist that clung instantly to railings, ropes, and the faces of anyone who dared to stand watch. Ships, moored uneasily at their docks, groaned as their hulls pressed against one another, wooden frames creaking beneath the weight of ice. Masts stood like skeletons in the storm, their rigging coated in thick layers of frost that crackled whenever the wind forced them to shift. Fishermen and sailors lingered in warehouses along the shore, their bodies gathered close around stoves that never seemed hot enough. The smell of wet wool, soaked leather, and smoke filled the rooms. Boots, lined up near the flames, steamed and dripped onto the wooden floors. Some men spoke in low tones about the blizzard's fury, recalling tales of storms at sea where waves rose higher than rooftops. Yet even these hardened men admitted, this storm was different. It was not just water and wind. It was ice, relentless and suffocating. An enemy that crept into every crack and stole strength hour by hour. Ferry boats, normally so busy carrying workers between Manhattan and Brooklyn, sat idle, their decks buried beneath snow. Captains paced the docks, their faces pale as they peered into the white blur where river and sky seemed to merge into one. To send a boat across would be to vanish into that nothingness, and so the ferries stayed tied, ropes straining and snapping with every gust. Passengers, shivering in the waiting halls, were told there would be no crossings until the storm passed. Some groaned in frustration, others quietly resigned, curling up on benches with their coats drawn close, choosing the misery of waiting over the danger of the waters. Even the great warehouses of the harbor, normally filled with the bustle of trade, seemed subdued. Barrels of goods sat untouched, their tops gathering snow from broken windows. Crates, stamped with labels from faraway lands, were damp with frost, their markings fading into illegibility. Dockhands who might once have worked late into the night had vanished, retreating homeward before the storm could trap them completely. And yet, despite the harbor's stillness, there was a strange beauty to be found there. The lamps along the piers glowed softly, their light refracting through sheets of ice that clung to the posts, making them glitter like crystal. Snow, blowing sideways across the river, sometimes parted just enough to reveal the dark outline of a ship, standing tall and motionless, like a sentinel guarding the frozen waters. The cries of the gulls were gone, replaced by the lonely groan of ice shifting beneath the tide. For those who gazed upon it, the harbor no longer looked like a gateway to the world. It looked like the edge of it, a boundary of silence, cold and white, where time itself seemed to pause. And though the people of New York huddled inland, comforted by their fires, the frozen harbor stood as a warning. The blizzard had claimed not only the streets but the waters themselves, and it would not surrender them easily. By the second night of the storm, the great avenues of New York had become almost unrecognizable. Broadway, once a river of sound and motion, lay buried beneath mountains of snow. The outlines of carriages, abandoned in haste, were nearly lost under drifts that rose taller with each hour. Wheels and spokes poked through here and there like the bones of creatures frozen in place, reminders of a city that had tried and failed to outpace the storm. Gas lamps flickered weakly, their flames dimmed by the force of the wind. In some districts, the lamps had gone out altogether, snuffed by the snow that plastered itself to glass and metal until even the brightest flame could not push through. The darkness was unsettling. The city that never truly slept now found itself cloaked in shadow, its familiar rhythm broken. Those brave enough to wander out with lanterns held them close, their light swallowed almost instantly by the swirling air, creating little more than a small halo of gold in the endless white. Along the sidewalks, shops stood shuttered. Signboards creaked violently, some snapping free and vanishing into the storm. Windows rattled in their frames, and awnings collapsed beneath the weight of snow, sagging and tearing with sudden, startling cracks. The few businesses that dared to remain open, bakeries with the smell of stale bread drifting faintly through their doors, taverns glowing dimly with lantern light, had become crowded refuges. Inside, men and women pressed shoulder to shoulder, stamping snow from their boots, their breath fogging the air as they shared rumors of when the storm might break. Yet outside, the streets grew stranger by the hour. The drifts formed walls and tunnels, reshaping the avenues into a labyrinth. A man could walk down a familiar block and find it transformed into an alien passageway. The snow piled higher than his head on either side, the only view ahead a narrow corridor filled with blowing white. Sound carried strangely in those spaces, the whistle of the wind echoing as though through a canyon, footsteps muffled into silence, voices snatched away before they could travel more than a few feet. For children peering from upper windows, it was a world both terrifying and magical. They pressed their hands to the frosted glass, watching the storm sculpt mountains where none had been before. Some laughed, imagining the streets as secret kingdoms of ice. Others clung to their mothers' skirts, sensing the fear that the grown-ups tried to hide. For though there was a wonder to the sight, there was also a weight, the understanding that these darkened avenues were no longer safe paths but traps, waiting for anyone who lingered too long in the cold. And so the city withdrew into itself. Behind closed doors, families whispered prayers, tended fires, and counted what food remained. Outside, the avenues lay silent, blanketed in white, their outlines erased, their lights dimmed. A city that once proclaimed itself unstoppable now bent beneath the storm, its greatest streets reduced to lonely corridors of snow and shadow. High above the buried streets in the crowded tenements of the Lower East Side, the storm revealed itself in ways both quiet and relentless. From the narrow windows, families could see only a blur of white and shadow, the storm pressing against the glass like a living thing. The panes rattled in their frames, thin barriers against the cold, and the frost crept across them in patterns that looked like branches of trees, spreading farther with each passing hour. Inside, the rooms were close and dim. Coal stoves glowed faintly in the corners, their heat fighting a losing battle against the drafts that slipped through cracks in the walls. Mothers draped blankets over doorways to keep the warmth inside, turning each room into a pocket of survival. Children sat bundled in scarves and coats even indoors, their mittens still on as they clutched bits of bread or sipped thin broth from tin cups. The smell of smoke clung to everything, their hair, their clothes, their very skin. Neighbors spoke through the walls. The buildings were so crowded, so thinly separated that one could hear the cough of an old man upstairs, or the murmur of a lullaby being sung next door. Some families knocked gently on the plaster to share reassurances, small signals of comfort in the storm's isolation. Yet the sounds of the outside world, horses, carts, laughter, were gone. In their place came only the wind, keening like a lost voice through alleys and chimneys. Water froze in the basins. Laundry, left damp from the wash, stiffened into boards. Bread grew stale and hard, its crusts cracking like stone when broken. The taste of food was dull, for hunger made every mouthful vanish too quickly. But no one complained, not loudly at least. To waste energy on complaints was to invite despair, and despair was dangerous when the storm seemed endless. From the windows, some children pressed their palms to the frost, drawing little pictures with their fingertips before the cold forced them to pull away. Others simply stared, their wide eyes reflecting the strange new world outside. They saw the drifts rise higher, swallowing staircases, pressing against doors. They saw figures stumbling by with scarves drawn to their eyes, snow collecting on their shoulders until they looked more like statues than people. They saw the city vanishing under the blizzard's hand, hour by hour, until even the boldest child felt a quiet shiver of unease. Still, there was hope in those crowded rooms. A mother sang softly, her voice muffled by the storm but steady, wrapping her children in comfort that no blanket could provide. A father told stories of winters long past, when the rivers froze solid and people walked across them as though on land. An old grandmother whispered prayers, her rosary beads clicking faintly in the lamplight. Each family found its way to endure, to wait, to believe that dawn might bring not just another day of snow but perhaps a break in the storm. And so, behind the trembling panes of the tenement windows, life continued, fragile, weary, but unbroken, while outside, the blizzard raged on, blind to the small lights of courage flickering in the dark. Along the great arteries of the city, the streetcars stood frozen in their tracks. Only a day before, their bells had rung out steadily, a familiar sound of movement and life echoing down Broadway and across Union Square. Now, they were silent hulks, their wheels locked beneath mountains of snow. The storm had claimed them utterly, burying rails, choking switches, and silencing the clang of progress. Some cars had been abandoned mid-journey. Their wooden frames, painted in bright colors now dulled by frost, stood half-buried, leaning against the wind. Snow piled against their doors until they could no longer open, the drifts climbing past windows like waves swallowing a stranded boat. Inside, a few passengers remained at first, hoping the storm would ease, their breath fogging the cold glass as they waited. But as the hours passed and the carriages grew colder than the streets outside, they had been forced to make a choice, to risk the storm on foot, or to freeze in place. The streets around them had transformed into wastelands of white. Rails that once gleamed under lamplight were invisible now, hidden beneath rolling mounds. Conductors who had braved the storm early on, ringing their bells with determination, were driven back by winds so fierce they could barely see a yard ahead. Their voices were carried off before reaching their passengers, and their horses, brave as they were, faltered, trembling as snow clung to their manes and lashes. The silence was unsettling, where once the steady rhythm of wheels on track, the clang of bells, and the calls of drivers filled the night. Now there was only the howl of the wind and the creak of wood under the storm's weight. A few lanterns still hung in the cars, glowing weakly through frosted windows, casting soft halos of yellow in the swirling dark. To a passerby, they looked like lanterns trapped inside a tomb of ice. Children, peering from their tenement windows, whispered about those stranded trolleys. To them, they seemed like ships trapped in a frozen sea, their decks buried, their passengers vanished into the storm. Some swore they saw shadows moving inside, though whether it was memory, imagination, or some lone traveler seeking shelter, no one could say. For the city's workers, the halted trolleys were more than an inconvenience. They were a sign of paralysis. Without them, laborers could not reach factories, clerks could not reach offices, and families could not reunite across neighborhoods. The lifeblood of movement had been cut, and New York's pulse slowed with it. And yet, amid the frozen silence, there was also resilience. Drivers returned to stable their horses, brushing frost from their coats, feeding them what little oats remained. Workers trudged through the drifts on foot, leaning into the wind with scarves drawn tight. Some even laughed in spite of themselves at the absurdity of it all. The proud city of New York stalled by snow as though it were no greater than a village at the edge of the wilderness. Still the trolleys remained, silent and unmoving, relics of a city that had been forced to yield. They would stay frozen until the storm's grip finally loosened, until men with shovels and horses with plows could dig them free. For now, they stood as monuments to the blizzard's power, their bells silent, their journeys unfinished. In a small brownstone on the edge of the Lower East Side, the Rosenberg family huddled together around a flickering coal stove. Outside, the storm raged without mercy, turning familiar streets into white deserts. But inside, the warmth offered a fragile sense of safety. Mrs. Rosenberg sat cross-legged on a woolen rug, her youngest child, little Miriam, curled against her chest. The child's cheeks were pink from the cold, lips chapped, hair sticking to the sweat of anxious tears. Mr. Rosenberg tended the fire, carefully feeding small lumps of coal, watching the flames leap and die as if they were creatures in need of constant care. The heat was never enough, but it was a shield, however thin, against the blizzard pressing against their walls. The smell of smoke mingled with the faint scent of bread, 2 loaves they had saved for emergencies, now hard and dry but sustaining. Mr. Rosenberg had boiled water earlier, and now it hissed in a small kettle on the stove. They sipped it slowly, warming themselves from the inside, the steam curling around their faces like gentle fingers. Outside, The wind screamed past the windows, rattling the panes, sending snow swirling into drifts that clung stubbornly to the building's edges. The family could hear the muffled footsteps of those braving the streets, the occasional shout and the distant groan of frozen trolleys. Each sound reminded them that the city was alive, but it was also trapped, held hostage by ice and snow. Mr. Rosenberg told stories to distract the children. He spoke of winters long past, when the rivers froze solid and people skated across them with laughter echoing into the air. His words were slow, deliberate, a rhythm meant to soothe. Each story wove a thread of hope into the room, a reminder that storms, even ones this brutal, would pass. Miriam's older brother, David, pressed his nose to the frosted window. He could see the snow swirling in the street below, shadows of figures staggering against the wind. He imagined them as travelers in another world, battling invisible giants. The vision scared him, yet at the same time, it filled him with awe. There was something majestic about the storm, something that reminded him of the fragility and courage of life. As night deepened, the family drew closer. Blankets wrapped them in warmth that their bodies desperately clung to, and whispers of reassurance passed from parent to child. Though the cold was relentless and the wind unyielding, inside that brownstone there was a bubble of life, of humanity, of persistence. They were safe, for now. The city outside had surrendered to the storm, but inside that small home, the Rosenbergs held on to light, warmth, and each other. In the face of unyielding ice and wind, hope persisted, not loud, not brash, but quiet and steady, like the heartbeat of a family refusing to be broken. On the corner of Canal Street, a small bakery remained lit despite the blizzard. The windows were fogged with steam, and a faint, comforting aroma of baking bread drifted into the whitewashed street. Inside, Mr. Whitman, the baker, worked tirelessly, kneading dough with hands reddened by both flour and cold. He had chosen to stay behind, knowing that many families depended on him for sustenance during the storm's long hours. The streets outside were unrecognizable, the snow piled high against the shopfront, curling around the iron railings and forming drifts that almost reached the windowsills. Every gust of wind pressed against the doors, rattling the glass and carrying whirls of icy powder inside. Mr. Whitman wrapped his thick apron tighter around his waist and shook the snow from his coat, reminding himself that even in the storm's relentless fury, his work mattered. Inside, the warmth of the oven filled the room with a golden glow. The smell of yeast, caramelizing sugar, and bread baking filled every corner, cutting through the smell of smoke and wet wool that had collected from his own soaked coat. The baker paused occasionally to glance outside, watching the streets. Shadows of figures trudged through the snow, some leaning on canes, others clutching scarves to their faces, but all pressed onward. He could see their determination reflected in the amber light of the bakery windows, a quiet resilience that warmed him as much as the fire. He worked slowly, methodically, rolling dough, shaping loaves and sliding them into the oven. The rhythm was comforting, almost hypnotic, a steady beat against the chaotic storm outside. The rising warmth of the kitchen, the golden crusts forming in the oven, and the soft hiss of steam escaping the loaves created a cocoon of calm amid the raging blizzard. By midnight, the snow had risen higher than ever before, and the streets were almost impossible to traverse. But Mr. Whitman remained at his post, placing fresh loaves on racks and listening to the storm. He imagined families returning from the darkened streets, grateful for warmth and food, their mouths tasting bread that would fill more than hunger. It would fill hope. Even in the city's frozen heart, in a small bakery corner, life endured. The wind may have howled and the snow may have claimed the streets, but inside that shop light and warmth remained steadfast, a beacon for those who would come. On the avenues where snow had piled higher than a man's shoulders, workers stumbled through the storm, leaning into the wind as though it were a physical force pressing them backward. Their coats, soaked through from hours of travel, clung uncomfortably to their bodies, and scarves wrapped around their faces became stiff with ice. Every step was an effort, each footfall sinking deep into the snow, only to be met with the next layer drifting in from the swirling white. Among them was Thomas, a clerk from a small office near Wall Street. He had left work late, confident that a short walk would take him home. But the city had changed. Streets were no longer streets, they were rivers of snow, twisting around abandoned carts, toppled signposts, and drifts that rose like hills along sidewalks. He paused, leaning on the handle of his cane, and exhaled, watching his own breath condense into tiny clouds that vanished into the wind. Every inhale was sharp, every movement a reminder of the blizzard's unforgiving cold. Nearby, a mother held the hand of her young daughter, dragging her slowly through the drifts. Her fingers were numb, and she could feel the little girl shivering against her side. Each gust of wind seemed to cut through them like glass, and yet she whispered softly, singing lullabies to keep fear at bay. The child's eyes, wide with wonder and anxiety, reflected the white chaos around them. Snow swirled in ribbons, blurring everything beyond a few feet, turning familiar street corners into strange, shifting landscapes. The wind tore at coats and scarves, snatched hats from heads, and carried icy needles across exposed skin. Thomas paused to adjust his scarf and noticed the faint footprints in the snow, those of earlier travelers, some who had given up, some who were still pressing forward. He realized that each person moving through this storm was a small act of courage, a quiet defiance against the blizzard's relentless domination. From the rooftops above, some brave souls watched the city below, their eyes tracing shadows that moved like ghosts through the white. Chimneys creaked under the weight of ice, and the smoke from fires rose slowly, twisting into the storm. Even from above, the city seemed to breathe beneath the snow, each building and street a part of a vast, frozen organism. Hours passed slowly. Thomas and the mother with her child found themselves crossing streets buried beyond recognition, leaning on each other for support. They were weary, cold, but in their quiet perseverance, there was triumph. Every step forward was a victory. Every block crossed, every intersection survived was proof that human determination could endure even the most brutal cold. And when they finally glimpsed the warm glow of lanterns from windows ahead, the promise of home and safety felt brighter than any sunlight. In the midst of the city's frozen chaos, even brief moments of warmth and light became sacred, reminders that life, though challenged, could continue. Above the snowbound streets, on the slanted roofs of Manhattan's brownstones and tenements, the blizzard pressed with a deafening weight. Chimneys groaned under the accumulation of frost, and the iron railings of fire escapes were coated in thick ice, their edges sharp and glinting like crystal knives. From up here, the city below seemed almost unrecognizable, a vast white expanse, streets buried and alleys lost, lights blurred and diffused in halos of swirling snow. A lone man, Samuel, had climbed to the roof of his building to check on the chimneys and the tarpaulins covering water tanks. His boots crunched through the snow, sending tiny clouds of powder into the air. Each step demanded balance. Every gust of wind threatened to unseat him. He pressed himself low, hands gripping icy metal, and peered over the edge. The city stretched endlessly beneath him, a frozen labyrinth. Smoke from distant chimneys twisted into the storm, curling and snapping in the wind before disappearing into white. From above, the blizzard looked less like a storm and more like a living creature. Waves of snow drifted across the cityscape, piling against rooftops, forming ridges and valleys where the streets had been. The lamps lining the avenues flickered in ghostly patterns, like faint stars trapped in the storm. Horses and people appeared as tiny shadows, moving in slow motion, struggling against invisible forces. Samuel could hear only the howl of the wind and the creaking of wood beneath ice. Every sound carried far and yet seemed swallowed immediately, leaving an eerie hush that pressed into the chest. On a neighboring roof, a young woman named Clara wrapped herself in blankets and watched the city's chaos below. She could see the trolleys stranded in the drifts, the faint glow of windows that offered warmth and light, and figures navigating the streets with determination. Her breath fogged in the cold, and her fingertips were numb, yet she felt a strange serenity in this vantage point. From above, the city's struggles became part of a larger rhythm, a quiet choreography of endurance and hope beneath the storm. Even the tallest steeples and towers seemed to bow under the blizzard's hand. Snow piled on gargoyles and railings, weighing down the stone until it sagged faintly. Church bells, which would normally ring with comforting resonance, remained silent, their tongues frozen in the icy air. Yet the rooftops offered a unique perspective, a quiet grandeur, a reminder of how small individual struggles were against the vastness of nature, and how remarkable it was that life persisted at all. As Samuel and Clara surveyed the city, they felt a strange kinship with the people below, workers trudging through drifts, children huddled by fires, families in tenements whispering stories and prayers. All were connected by the storm, all held together by the unspoken determination to endure. In the white expanse below, the city's pulse continued, faint but steady, a rhythm of life refusing to be extinguished. By the third night, the great blizzard had reached its relentless crescendo. The snow no longer fell as delicate flakes. It surged in sheets whipped sideways by winds so fierce they seemed to lift even the heaviest drifts and hurl them across streets. The city, already buried, now appeared as a frozen expanse, with only rooftops, chimneys, and occasional lampposts piercing the endless white. On the streets below, travelers moved like shadows, their progress measured in inches rather than steps. Scarves and coats were stiff with ice. Boots sank deep with every attempt at forward motion. Each gust of wind sliced across exposed skin, biting and stinging, leaving a lingering numbness that seemed to grow with each passing moment. The few lamps that still glowed were distorted, halos blurred into the storm, casting eerie patterns that shifted and swirled with the movement of snow. Inside tenements, families clung to warmth as if it were a fragile lifeline. The Rosenbergs, the Whitmans, and countless others gathered closer to fires, blankets wrapped tight, lips pressed together to hold back shivers. The smell of smoke, cooking bread, and damp wool-filled rooms mingling with the faint metallic tang of cold that had seeped through walls. Children listened to whispered stories and lullabies, their eyes wide but slowly growing heavy, soothed by the cadence of voices against the relentless roar outside. On rooftops, the wind tore at chimneys and tarpaulins with unyielding force. Samuel and Clara braced themselves against gusts that threatened to sweep them away. Snow clung to their clothing, forming layers of frost that weighed them down. Yet from this height, they could see the city in all its frozen glory. Trolleys buried in drifts, streets swallowed entirely, shadows of trudging figures barely visible through the swirling whiteness. The city seemed at once vast, beautiful, and terrifying, a reminder of both nature's power and human resilience. Even the harbor had surrendered to the storm's might. Ice sheets clashed violently against piers. Ferries were immobilized, their decks slick with frozen spray. The water, usually dark and flowing, now carried shards of ice and snow, moving slowly like a river turned to stone. Sailors, huddled in warehouses, listened to the cracking of rigging and the groan of hulls under ice, hearts tightening with every sound. Yet amid the chaos, quiet moments of hope persisted. A child pressed her cheek to a warm window pane, marveling at the snow-covered world. A father reassured his son, holding him close to stave off the cold. A baker slid another loaf of bread from the oven, its scent spilling into the white night. Life endured, persistent and gentle, even as the storm's heart roared around it. The blizzard had claimed the city fully, yet within homes, on rooftops, and in the stubborn hearts of those still moving, there was a calm, a rhythm, a quiet perseverance. It was in this delicate balance between chaos and comfort that New York endured, held together by resilience, warmth, and the unspoken knowledge that storms, even the greatest, would eventually pass. In the midst of the storm's deafening roar, small gestures of care became lifelines. On Orchard Street, a laborer named Jacob noticed an elderly neighbor struggling to carry a basket through the ankle-deep snow. Without hesitation, he pressed forward, bracing against the wind, lifting the basket from her hands and guiding her carefully along the drifted sidewalks. Every step was a challenge, the snow shifting unpredictably underfoot, but Jacob's determination never faltered. The woman's face, lined with years and hardship, softened into a grateful smile, a tiny light in the white chaos surrounding them. Meanwhile, across the Lower East Side, two children had become separated from their mother while crossing a street. They huddled together, shivering beneath layers of wool, their eyes wide with both fear and wonder, as the snow swirled around them like ghostly dancers. A shopkeeper, noticing their plight, stepped into the storm, wrapping his own scarf tightly and scooping them into his arms. He carried them across the drifted street to the safety of his warm store, where the children pressed their cold hands to the oven's heat, watching their breaths curl into tiny clouds before disappearing into the air. In the harbor district, sailors and dock workers helped one another steady boats pressed under sheets of ice. They hauled ropes together, their gloved hands stiff from frost, calling out instructions over the wind's roar. A young apprentice, frightened by the sound of cracking ice, was guided by a seasoned captain who whispered encouragement, showing him how to lean into the storm rather than resist it. Their coordinated efforts kept a vessel from capsizing, preserving not just property but the lives of all on board. Even in the tenements, quiet kindness took root. Families shared blankets and food, pushing slices of bread or thin broth across narrow hallways. A mother offered a candle to a neighbor whose fire had gone out, her own hearth dimmer but her spirit brightened by the act. Children were coaxed into helping each other fetch water or stack firewood, turning small chores into moments of camaraderie and shared purpose. These acts, though subtle against the blizzard's overwhelming presence, formed threads of resilience that wove through the city. Each gesture, lifting a basket, sharing a blanket, steadying a frightened apprentice, was a quiet rebellion against the storm's dominance. In the shadows of towering drifts and howling winds, humanity glimmered, persistent and gentle, like candlelight flickering in a whitewashed night. And as the storm raged on, those small acts of courage and kindness became more than gestures. They were reminders. Even in the coldest, harshest nights, the warmth of connection endured, whispering that no one would face the storm entirely alone. Beneath the storm's white veil, the city concealed countless hazards. Streets that appeared smooth and uniform were actually treacherous landscapes of ice, hidden potholes, and collapsed carts. Travelers, trudging through the deep snow, had to navigate slowly, testing each step before committing their weight. One false move could send a foot slipping into a frozen puddle, or worse, a hidden hole that yawned beneath the snow. The Johnson family, making their way home from a late shift, felt the storm's danger firsthand. Father gripped Mother's hand tightly, while their children clung to both of them. Every block they crossed brought new challenges. Snow hidden under street lamps glimmered deceptively, masking uneven sidewalks. A loose signpost, knocked by the wind, teetered above a doorway, and a sudden gust sent it swinging, narrowly missing their heads. Hearts pounded, breaths came in sharp gasps, but together they moved carefully, step by step, whispering encouragement to one another. On the rooftops, dangers were equally severe but silent. Chimneys threatened to collapse under the ice's weight. Tarpaulins covering water tanks ripped and flapped violently. Samuel and Clara, who had climbed to inspect the roof earlier, now faced a perilous descent. Each foothold required careful judgment. A slip could mean a fall into a snowdrift that, though deep, might conceal sharp debris below. Yet their resolve remained steady. They reminded each other to pause, breathe, and plan each step before moving. The harbor, too, held unseen threats. Ferries immobilized by ice were surrounded by jagged shards floating in the water. Dock workers moving across the pier risked stepping onto a weak section of ice, which could break under sudden pressure. Yet even here, small acts of caution and cooperation prevented disaster. Hands were held firmly, ropes were tied taut, and guidance whispered over the wind's roar ensured that no one succumbed to a hidden pitfall. Even indoors, the storm's dangers persisted. Fireplaces, struggling against the icy drafts, occasionally puffed smoke into rooms, causing coughing fits and discomfort. Ice pressed against window frames, threatening cracks. Water pipes groaned under the cold, and one burst sent a trickle of icy water across a tenement floor, forcing a family to work together to prevent a flood. These subtler hazards reminded residents that survival required vigilance, patience, and careful planning. Yet through each trial, a calm perseverance endured. Every careful step, every cautious move, every whispered instruction was a testament to human endurance. Even when the city seemed consumed by the blizzard's power, life adapted. Families leaned on one another. Travelers moved with purpose, and rooftop watchers guided each other through danger. In this way, the hidden perils of the storm became a quiet rhythm of awareness and care, a steady heartbeat beneath the roaring white. And as the night deepened, those who survived its challenges did so not through luck alone, but through attentiveness, courage, and the gentle cooperation of those around them. By the fourth night, the city's inhabitants felt the storm not only in their bones but in their spirits. The relentless wind and snow had drained energy, leaving muscles stiff and minds heavy. Each day, or what felt like a day in the endless white, blurred into the next, the hours measured only by the dim glow of lamps and the rhythm of fires struggling to stay alive. In a cramped tenement, the Levin family sat close together, heads bowed over a small table where a thin broth simmered. The children, weary from hours spent huddled and peering through frost-covered windows, leaned against their mother's side. Their eyelids drooped, their breaths slow, yet worry kept them from fully sleeping. Outside, the storm's howl seeped through cracks, pressing against walls as if testing the family's endurance. Mr. Levin, though exhausted, tried to maintain calm. He stroked his children's hair, whispered soft encouragements, and reminded them of brighter days before the blizzard. Every word, every gesture was deliberate, a small act of comfort in a world of cold and uncertainty. Yet the weight of isolation pressed down, a quiet, invisible force. The absence of normal sounds, footsteps, bells, laughter, made the city feel distant, even alien. Elsewhere, travelers who had braved the streets for hours now found themselves trapped in alleyways and vestibules, clinging to walls or leaning against piles of snow. Fatigue made even the simplest movement laborious. Hands and feet stiffened, faces stung from frostbite, and the mind began to wander into shadows of doubt. "How much longer?" they whispered, voices barely audible over the storm's roar. But within that whisper lay a flicker of determination, a refusal to give in. Rooftop watchers, too, felt the strain. Samuel and Clara had spent nearly a full day above the streets, checking chimneys and securing tarpaulins. Each gust of wind seemed stronger than the last, every footing more precarious. The cold gnawed at their limbs, their lungs burned with each inhale, and yet they persisted. They reminded each other to breathe, to move slowly, to take heart in the small victories, the chimney that held firm, the snowdrift that didn't collapse, the distant lantern that glimmered through the storm. Even amid the fatigue, hope persisted. Families found comfort in shared warmth, travelers in the guidance of strangers, rooftop watchers in the quiet solidarity of the city below. The storm may have worn them down, but it could not extinguish human resilience. Every whispered prayer, every song, every gentle touch was a thread connecting them to the life that continued, despite the blizzard's overwhelming power. In this way, weariness became both a burden and a reminder. It reminded each soul of their limits, but also of their strength. Even as exhaustion weighed heavily, the city's inhabitants endured, small sparks of hope flickering steadily in the endless white, guiding them through the storm's long, unyielding night. Amid the blizzard's relentless fury, subtle moments of beauty emerged, delicate and fleeting like whispers in the wind. On the rooftops, icicles hung from chimneys and eaves, catching the faint glow of gas lamps below. Each one glimmered like crystal, refracting light into tiny rainbows that danced across the snow-covered tiles. The effect was almost magical, a gentle contrast to the storm's ferocity, reminding the watchers above of the artistry hidden within nature's chaos. On the streets, snow swirled in patterns shaped by the wind. It spun and twisted in spirals, forming miniature dunes and ripples over the buried trolleys, cobblestones, and abandoned carts. Each gust painted temporary designs, so intricate and ephemeral that a single glance could capture only part of their beauty before they shifted again. Travelers noticed these patterns, often pausing in quiet awe despite the cold that pressed against them, small sparks of wonder softening their fatigue. Inside tenements, the storm's beauty was visible through frost-laced windows. Delicate fern-like patterns spread across the glass, etched by the cold in delicate, jagged perfection. Children pressed their palms to these frozen shapes, tracing the lines with curiosity and delight, discovering miniature forests and snow-capped mountains that existed only for a moment, before the warmth of their hands blurred them away. Parents smiled quietly, sharing in their children's marvel even as they remained vigilant against the storm outside. In the harbor, where ice formed jagged sheets across the water, moonlight sometimes broke through thin clouds, casting a silver sheen over the frozen waves. Shadows of ships and piers reflected in the pale light, creating the illusion of a city doubled beneath the snow. Sailors huddled in warehouses or on decks caught glimpses of these reflections and, for a moment, allowed themselves to imagine calm waters beneath the blizzard, a reminder that even amid chaos, stillness and beauty could exist. Even the wind itself carried an eerie elegance. As it tore across rooftops and streets, it whistled in soft, fluctuating tones that sounded like a ghostly symphony. At times, the gusts would harmonize with the creaking of frozen wood and the distant groan of ice-laden ferries, creating a rhythm that was both haunting and mesmerizing. Those who paused to listen found themselves soothed, the music of the storm lulling them into a strange, reflective calm. In the heart of the blizzard, life's struggles persisted, but so too did these delicate moments of wonder. They were fleeting, yes, and often overshadowed by the storm's might. Yet they reminded everyone, watchers on rooftops, travelers in the streets, families in their homes, that even in the harshest winters, the world held glimpses of fragile, breathtaking beauty. As the blizzard raged on, tiny victories became treasures in the lives of New Yorkers. In the dim light of a tenement hallway, a family managed to stack enough firewood to keep their stove burning through the coldest hours. Each piece carefully placed, each log nudged into position, brought warmth inch by inch. The room glowed softly as the fire breathed life into their frozen hands and stiffened limbs, a quiet triumph over the storm's relentless chill. Outside, on the snow-choked streets, a group of neighbors worked together to clear a path through drifts that reached chest-high. Their hands were raw, fingers stiff with cold, but they took turns shoveling, supporting one another, and encouraging weary companions. When they finally opened a narrow passage, laughter and quiet exclamations of relief punctuated the air, warm bubbles of joy in the midst of the white tempest. In a small bakery, Mr. Whitman slid a fresh loaf of bread from the oven, its crust golden and fragrant. He wrapped it carefully and placed it in a basket, then stepped outside to distribute slices to travelers huddled against snow-covered lampposts. The simple act of nourishment sparked smiles, small words of thanks, and the fleeting comfort of warmth in a frozen world. Every smile, every bite, was a quiet victory against the storm's harshness. On the rooftops, Samuel and Clara secured a loose tarpaulin that had threatened to peel away in a violent gust. With careful coordination and mutual trust, they tied it down, ensuring that the water tank below remained protected. The achievement felt monumental despite its small scale, a triumph over the storm's attempts to wreak havoc. They paused to catch their breath, watching the city below, realizing that each safe roof, each stable structure, was a victory for everyone depending on it. Even in the harbor, where frozen ferries and ice-choked piers seemed immovable, small acts of courage persisted. Sailors guided each other along treacherous ice, steadying the younger and weaker, rescuing crates that had slid free, and maintaining lines that tethered boats to their docks. Every task completed was a testament to resilience, a quiet celebration in the face of overwhelming nature. And in these moments, the city itself seemed to exhale. Though the blizzard had taken so much, the streets, the trolleys, the familiar rhythm of daily life, human perseverance created pockets of warmth, light, and hope. These small triumphs, gentle and deliberate, were reminders that even when the world seemed entirely white and unyielding, life endured. Amid the endless swirl of snow, fear and fatigue became threads that wove people together, forging bonds that might never have existed in ordinary days. In a dimly lit tenement, neighbors gathered in a small hallway after sharing blankets and bread. Their laughter was quiet, cautious, but it carried warmth through the cold. Stories of past winters and gentle reassurances were exchanged, each word knitting a sense of community as tightly as the layers of scarves and coats that protected them from the storm outside. A few streets over, travelers who had lost their way in the white haze found each other by chance. Hands reached out instinctively, guiding one another through chest-high drifts and icy sidewalks. A simple touch, a steadying hand, or a whispered instruction became more than practical. It was comfort, a reminder that they were not alone. Even the briefest shared smile or nod became a lifeline, quiet proof that human connection endured even in extreme isolation. Families grew closer too. Children, frightened by howling winds and shadows dancing across frosted windows, were held tighter in parents' arms. Fathers hummed songs to steady their children's trembling breaths. Mothers whispered stories to calm anxieties. In some households, older siblings took responsibility for younger ones, making small chores and responsibilities feel like acts of care. In the quiet, frost-lined rooms, trust and love were reinforced, becoming a shield against the storm's relentless power. On rooftops, Samuel and Clara, exhausted yet unyielding, found strength in each other's presence. Each gust of wind was shared, each careful movement coordinated. Their conversation was sparse but meaningful, words exchanged between breaths and pauses. In their quiet cooperation, the storm's loneliness dissolved, replaced by the steady pulse of teamwork and mutual support. Even in the harbor, camaraderie was vital. Sailors leaning against icy rails cheered each other quietly as they stabilized boats, rescued fallen crates, or guided apprentices across slippery piers. Shared struggle became a source of unspoken connection. Every successful step, every completed task, deepened the invisible bonds holding them together against the storm. In these moments, the blizzard was no longer just a force of isolation. It became a catalyst for connection. The cold, the wind, the snow all threatened to separate people physically and emotionally, yet the very act of enduring it together created intimacy, trust, and resilience. Hearts were linked not through words alone, but through shared courage, shared fear, and shared determination. And so, as the storm roared outside, the city's hidden warmth pulsed quietly from within, the bonds of human care, kindness, and courage forming an invisible network strong enough to withstand even the harshest winter. The city's familiar landmarks had become unrecognizable beneath the relentless blizzard. Broadway, once a river of lamps and noise, was now a soft valley of snow, its cobblestones invisible under the drifting white. The spires of churches jutted like frozen fingers through the storm, their silhouettes softened and blurred by swirling flakes. Even the proud towers of office buildings seemed less imposing, their outlines fragile against the shifting, endless snow. City Hall, usually a bustling hub of business and ceremony, stood silent and solemn. Its steps were buried, the iron railings coated in frost, the doors barely visible under layers of drifted snow. Gas lamps lining the square cast a dim halo into the storm, creating shadows that danced like ghosts across the marble facade. Travelers who glimpsed the building from afar felt a strange mix of awe and trepidation, its grandeur softened by the blizzard, yet still commanding in its quiet resilience. Bridges that normally carried clattering carriages and foot traffic over frozen or partially frozen rivers now appeared as frozen arcs of white. Ice clung to the metal beams, snow piled thick on walkways, and the wind sang mournful tones through suspension cables. Anyone daring to cross felt the tug of nature's power, the bridge both familiar and terrifying, a reminder of how the city's greatest engineering triumphs could be humbled by the storm. The ferries in the harbor had become ghostly silhouettes, their hulls buried in sheets of ice, decks slick with frozen spray. The masts jutted awkwardly, straining against the wind, ropes snapping with tension. From the shoreline, their outlines appeared almost dreamlike, like ships trapped in a frozen painting, reminding observers of the delicate balance between human ingenuity and nature's overwhelming force. Even smaller details became enchanting. Street lamps bent under the snow's weight, casting halos of light that glimmered in the storm. A wrought iron fence, usually mundane, was now a lacework of frost and ice, every loop and curl highlighted by the snow's coating. Trees along the avenues sagged beneath heavy drifts, their branches sparkling like delicate chandeliers when the occasional lantern light brushed across them. Amid these transformed landmarks there was a quiet poetry. The city was both altered and familiar, brutal yet beautiful. Its grandeur had not vanished. It had merely changed shape, rendered soft and white. and reframed by the storm's power. Observers, whether from rooftops, windows, or snowbound streets, found themselves in a new city entirely. A city of silence, of frozen light, of wonder, and of a calm that could soothe even the weariest soul. As dawn approached on the fifth day, the blizzard's fury began to soften ever so slightly. The wind, though still biting, no longer screamed with the same unrelenting force. Snowflakes still fell, but they drifted gently now, like feathers settling on the city's exhausted rooftops and streets. The endless white that had pressed so heavily against windows and doors began to shift, revealing glimpses of the shapes beneath. Buildings, carts, trolleys, and bridges slowly re-emerging from their snowy graves. In the tenements, families stirred with cautious optimism. Children peeked through frost-laced windows, pressing their noses to the glass, eyes wide as they saw a street lamp or rooftop finally free from the heaviest snow. Mothers and fathers exchanged relieved glances, hearts lifting with the faint promise that the storm might be easing. The warmth from stoves and ovens seemed a little sweeter, the smell of bread a little richer, and the glow of lamps softer yet more comforting than ever before. Outside, travelers paused in the streets, marveling at how the city's familiar contours had returned, softened but visible. Footprints in the snow, once lost in drifts, became paths again. Shadows of buildings and street furniture slowly gained clarity. Workers who had been stranded overnight began to test their paths with renewed hope, taking careful steps along streets now slightly more navigable. Each inch forward was a quiet victory, a tangible sign that the storm's power was waning. On the rooftops, Samuel and Clara exhaled deeply, leaning against the snow-laden chimneys. The wind no longer threatened to sweep them off balance, and the ice that had coated every surface began to loosen, allowing for safer footing. From this height, the city looked different, not frozen and hostile, but quiet, reflective, almost peaceful. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys instead of whipping in sharp spirals, and snow sparkled in faint sunlight filtering through thinning clouds. In the harbor, ice still clung to the ferries and piers, but water flowed more freely beneath fragile sheets. Sailors guided boats with cautious relief, their movements slow but confident, each successful maneuver a quiet triumph. The first gentle waves lapping against the hulls felt miraculous, signaling that the frozen expanse might soon reclaim its rhythm. Even the smallest details reflected change. Icicles glimmered in the dim morning light, dripping tiny beads of water onto snow-crusted rooftops. Frost patterns on windows began to melt, revealing familiar streets and buildings below. Every sound, the soft creak of wood, the distant bell of a lantern, the murmur of conversation, felt amplified, gentle reminders that life persisted, resilient and patient even after the storm's overwhelming power. And so, in the hushed moments of the early morning, the city sensed a shift. The storm was losing its grip. Life, so patiently enduring, began to stretch, breathe, and hope once more. A subtle calm settled over New York, a quiet, reflective pause between hardship and recovery, inviting those who had weathered the blizzard to gather strength for the day ahead. With the storm finally easing, cautious footsteps began to echo through the streets. Families, travelers, and workers ventured out, wrapped in layers of wool, scarves, and coats stiffened by frost. Each movement was deliberate, careful. Snow remained deep, uneven, and slippery, but the terror of the previous days had given way to curiosity and cautious hope. The Rosenberg family emerged first, peering over drifts taller than themselves. Little Miriam clutched her mother's hand, her breath forming soft clouds that vanished instantly into the crisp morning air. David, her older brother, marveled at the way the snow sculpted familiar street corners into new shapes, trees draped in sparkling white, signs poking through drifts like forgotten monuments, and doorways half hidden yet resilient. The streets were unfamiliar yet welcoming, as if the city had transformed overnight into a winter wonderland. Workers who had been stranded in alleyways or mid-block stepped into the streets, brushing snow from their coats, shaking their hair, and helping neighbors to navigate buried sidewalks. Conversations were soft and cautious, punctuated by laughter or gentle exclamations of relief. Strangers exchanged nods and shared directions, forging connections born from shared endurance. Even the briefest acts, handing a neighbor a scarf, helping lift a sled, clearing a doorway, felt monumental, affirming the strength of human cooperation. On rooftops, Samuel and Clara moved slowly along paths cleared of snow, surveying the city now softened by the storm's retreat. Shadows that had been ghostly and distorted became recognizable again. The glow of lanterns shimmered through the thawing frost, painting golden reflections on snow crusts and rooftops. Icicles dripped gently, tiny beads of water sparkling as they fell into already softened drifts below. From this height, the city no longer seemed hostile. It was quiet, still breathtakingly beautiful, and filled with possibility. The harbor, once locked under ice, now showed signs of gentle thaw. Ferries creaked as ice cracked away, water lapping softly against hulls. Dockworkers guided boats carefully, exchanging quiet words of relief as ropes were secured and crates shifted back into place. Every successful task, every safe step, felt like a victory, small but significant, as if the city itself were breathing again after days of suffocating snow. Even the smallest details invited wonder. Footprints traced winding paths through the drifts, leaving delicate patterns in the snow. Birds, cautious but returning, hopped along rooftops and fences. The smell of melted snow, mixed with smoke from chimneys, filled the air with a sharp yet comforting aroma. The city, once imprisoned by the storm, began to stir gently, revealing beauty, resilience, and hope in equal measure. And so, with careful steps and watchful eyes, residents stepped into this transformed city, reconnecting with the streets, each other, and the world beyond their frozen doors. Each movement was measured, calm, and deliberate. A meditation in motion, a quiet return to life after the storm's relentless embrace. As the morning light softened through the thinning clouds, residents began the delicate work of reclaiming their city from the storm's grasp. Streets once buried under towering drifts were slowly cleared by neighbors working together. Shovels scraped against cobblestones, snow was pushed aside into careful piles, and small teams of people coordinated their efforts to reopen walkways. The rhythm of labor was calming, almost meditative, each movement deliberate and purposeful, each small progress a quiet victory against the blizzard's aftermath. Families joined in, children helping to brush snow from doorways or carry small bundles of firewood. Laughter and gentle chatter filled the streets as strangers exchanged greetings and encouragement. Even the youngest residents felt pride in their contributions, understanding, if only subconsciously, that they were part of a collective effort to restore order, warmth, and life to the city. Workers ventured out to check on businesses and essential services. Mr. Whitman, the baker, moved crates of flour and stacked firewood behind his bakery, preparing to reopen for the community. Travelers returned cautiously to their routines, pausing to lend a hand wherever it was needed. Each shared task became more than labor. It was a reaffirmation of human endurance, cooperation, and hope. On rooftops, Samuel and Clara helped loosen the last sheets of ice clinging to gutters and tarpaulins. Their careful work ensured water tanks and chimneys were safe for the coming days. From this height, the city appeared less like a battlefield and more like a gentle landscape, softened by snow, but resilient beneath. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, footprints traced delicate paths through previously undisturbed drifts, and birds cautiously ventured from their hidden perches. Even the smallest acts mattered. Neighbors cleared frozen doorsteps for the elderly, replaced broken lanterns, and carried warm food to those still trapped indoors. In the quiet camaraderie, the storm's weight seemed to lift incrementally, not all at once, but through countless gentle efforts, a collective patience and care restoring life to the city. The transformation was subtle, yet profound. The city, once frozen and silent, began to hum again, not with the bustle of normal days, but with the softer, mindful rhythm of survival and recovery. Every cleared street, repaired roof, and helping hand became a note in this new melody, a slow, calming testament to resilience. In reclaiming the streets, the city's residents discovered not just physical relief, but emotional restoration. The shared struggle had deepened bonds, renewed hope, and reminded everyone that even after the harshest storm, life could return with quiet grace and gentle beauty. As the days following the blizzard unfolded, the city began to whisper hints of change. The snow, once towering and unyielding, softened under pale sunlight that filtered through thinning clouds. Roofs released fragile drips of melting ice, sending tiny beads of water onto sidewalks below, where footprints left delicate imprints in the wet, compacted snow. The air, still crisp, carried faint traces of warmth, promising the slow return of life beyond winter's grip. Families noticed first in small ways. A child pressed a gloved hand to a damp window pane, feeling the heat that had gradually seeped through the frozen glass. Birds, cautious at first, ventured from hidden ledges and trees, hopping along rooftops and fences, their soft chirps cutting gently through the lingering hush of the city. Even the aroma of wet earth and thawing snow seeped through cracks in the streets, a quiet reminder that life persisted beneath the frost. On the streets, neighbors observed subtle transformations. Drifts receded from doorways, revealing doors and steps that had been hidden for days. Ice-laden lanterns reflected sunlight, sparkling like tiny jewels and catching the eyes of passers-by. Children, cautiously exploring, lifted their boots from puddles forming where snow had melted, and parents smiled at their small adventures, sensing that the long night of winter was gradually giving way to light and warmth. Rooftops, too, showed signs of renewal. Icicles that had once threatened to fall in shards now melted slowly, forming gentle streams of water that traced edges and gutters. Samuel and Clara moved carefully, watching the droplets collect in small pools, the sunlight refracting through them to create fleeting rainbows. The city, viewed from above, seemed less frozen and more alive. A soft landscape of white melting into gray and brown, punctuated by the tiny hints of green peeking through sheltered corners. In the harbor, the ice that had gripped ferries and piers loosened, shifting and cracking into smaller sheets. Water moved with a gentle rhythm, slapping softly against hulls, and the sound, subtle and soothing, reminded sailors of tides and currents beyond the storm. Even the smell of salt and thawed sea air carried faint warmth, blending with the smoke from chimneys to create a scent both comforting and renewing. Amid these subtle signs of spring, the city's rhythm slowly returned. Life did not rush back suddenly. Instead, it unfurled gently with careful steps, cautious smiles, and deliberate movements. Every drip of melting ice, every fluttering bird, every soft reflection of sunlight was a quiet meditation, a reminder that the harshest winter had passed, and that the city, resilient and patient, was ready to awaken once more. As the storm finally retreated, and the city began to reveal its softened streets, families and neighbors found moments to celebrate their survival. There was no grand fanfare, only quiet, gentle acknowledgments of endurance and togetherness. In tenements, neighbors gathered in hallways, sharing tea, bread, and warm soup. Children giggled as they recounted small adventures, their frozen cheeks flushed with both cold and excitement, while adults exchanged smiles of relief, eyes reflecting a shared sense of triumph over the storm. Along streets still littered with small drifts, neighbors assisted one another in clearing debris. But now their work carried a lighter rhythm. Laughter punctuated the air as someone teased a friend for slipping in a puddle or joking about a stubborn mound of snow. Even simple acts, helping carry groceries, lending a hand with firewood, or offering blankets, became moments of connection and gentle celebration, reminders of shared humanity that had grown stronger through adversity. Families embraced their survival in private ways too. Parents tucked children closer at night, humming lullabies with a softer warmth, recounting stories of endurance and courage. The aroma of freshly baked bread, simmering stew, and strong coffee filled small apartments, creating comforting layers of scent that contrasted with the lingering chill outside. Each meal, each shared moment became a quiet tribute to resilience, a gentle recognition of the lives that had endured the blizzard's harsh grasp. On rooftops, Samuel and Clara paused to take in the city, now slowly reclaiming its rhythm. The softened snow, melting ice, and the faint sparkle of sun on frost created a serene panorama. They smiled at one another, their exhaustion mingled with quiet joy, knowing that the city below was awakening, not just physically but emotionally. Their work, their careful vigilance during the storm, had contributed to the safety of others, and in this gentle reflection, there was a sense of peaceful celebration. Even in the harbor, sailors and dock workers shared understated moments of camaraderie. The first free movement of ferries, the gentle cracking of melting ice, and the soft lapping of returning waters were celebrated with quiet laughter, a clap on the shoulder, or a nod of approval. There was no need for words. The shared relief was palpable, a soft exhalation of gratitude after the tension and fear of days past. Amid these quiet celebrations, the city seemed to breathe more fully, slowly shaking off the blizzard's weight. The snow, still present but softened, glimmered like a gentle reminder of endurance. Streets, rooftops, and piers reflected a soft light, and within every home and among every neighborly gesture, warmth, hope, and gentle gratitude blossomed. Life, though tempered by hardship, continued with deliberate care and quiet joy. With the blizzard behind them, New Yorkers began to rediscover the rhythms of daily life, each small routine a comforting reminder of stability. Shopkeepers slowly reopened doors, brushing snow from thresholds and stacking goods in windows. The faint scent of bread, coffee, and warmed oil drifted across streets, blending with the crisp, lingering smell of melting snow. Each aroma carried a promise. Life was continuing softly but surely. Children ventured outside, boots crunching carefully on thawing drifts. Their laughter, once muffled under the storm's roar, now rang gently through alleyways and courtyards. Snowballs were rolled with deliberate care, and sleds traced curving lines through softened slopes. Parents watched with quiet smiles, their breath forming tiny clouds in the gentle morning air. Every careful movement and measured step through the melting snow felt like a meditation, a soft reconnection with the world beyond the safety of warm homes. Workers resumed their duties, moving with a deliberate pace. Carriages slowly navigated streets still softened by snow, horses stamping carefully to avoid hidden patches of ice. Street lamps reflected softly off puddles formed by melting drifts, casting halos of golden light that shifted as the day progressed. The gentle clatter of tools, the quiet murmur of conversation, and the measured rhythm of footsteps created a soothing cadence, a slow, comforting heartbeat echoing through the city. Rooftop watchers, Samuel and Clara, observed the awakening city from above. Smoke rose in soft spirals from chimneys, birds ventured further from their perches, and pedestrians moved with cautious confidence along streets still dotted with snow. Even the subtle shimmer of icicles dripping in the warming sunlight seemed to mark the passage of time, a quiet celebration of resilience and renewal. In the harbor, ferries creaked as ice loosened beneath them, water lapping gently against hulls. Sailors navigated slowly, carefully returning to routines paused by the storm. Nets were checked, ropes tightened, and small repairs made with deliberate care. Every action, though measured and subdued, contributed to the city's overall rhythm, a testament to collective endurance and the quiet rebuilding of daily life. Even smaller details carried comforting continuity: the gentle squeak of boots on thawing snow, the soft whistle of wind through partially cleared streets, the distant toll of a bell marking the passage of the morning hour. Life returned not in haste, but in careful, deliberate movements, a slow, steady rhythm perfectly suited for reflection, calm, and quiet sleep. As the city settled into a slower rhythm, neighbors and friends found moments to reflect on the storm they had endured. In hallways and doorways, soft conversations floated through the air, voices warm and measured. Adults recounted small acts of courage, subtle moments of kindness, and tiny victories that had carried them through long nights. Children listened, wide-eyed, absorbing lessons of resilience and care, their imaginations painting the stories across frost-lined windows. In one quiet apartment, Mrs. Levine shared tea with a neighbor, recounting how strangers had helped clear paths through snowdrifts, offered warm bread, and guided lost travelers to safety. Each story, told in soft tones over the steam of hot drinks, created a sense of shared memory, a gentle acknowledgement of the collective courage that had carried the neighborhood through hardship. Smiles and nods punctuated the conversation, a quiet chorus of gratitude echoing in the still post-blizzard air. Across the streets, families paused in doorways to exchange greetings and reflect on moments that had mattered most. I never thought I'd see the day when our street was cleared, one whispered, voice filled with gentle awe. And yet here we are, came the reply, a soft exhalation of relief. Children peeked out from behind scarves, ears attuned to the warmth of connection, learning that the storm, though frightening, had drawn the community closer. Rooftops, still dusted with melting snow, held their own reflections. Samuel and Clara leaned against a chimney, eyes sweeping across streets slowly awakening. "It's strange," Samuel murmured. "How something so harsh could make us notice the kindness around us." Clara nodded, her fingers brushing against the frost that had softened with sunlight. "Every gesture mattered," she said, "even the smallest ones." In the quiet of the morning, they understood that resilience was built not only from surviving the storm, but from witnessing and participating in acts of care. Even the harbor seemed reflective. Sailors paused to observe their surroundings, noting the gentle ripple of water against thawing ice and the soft movements of returning birds. Conversations were subdued yet meaningful, highlighting teamwork, courage, and gratitude. Every nod, every shared story, carried weight, a quiet recognition that survival had been a communal effort. In this calm aftermath, reflection became a soothing ritual. The city, softened by snow and warmed by human connection, offered a space to honor endurance, courage, and kindness. Every whispered story, every shared smile, and every quiet remembrance became a gentle reminder. Even the harshest storm cannot erase the warmth of hearts united in compassion. With the storm finally retreating, subtle signs of nature began to emerge from beneath the snow's heavy blanket. Birds, cautious yet curious, hopped along rooftops and fences, pecking at scattered seeds and scratching at the softening snow. Their gentle chirps, delicate and clear, filled the quiet streets, a natural melody that eased tension and invited a sense of calm into the hearts of all who listened. Trees, once sagging under the weight of snow, began to straighten as their branches released frozen burdens. The snow clinging to bark melted in delicate rivulets, dripping slowly to the streets below. In some sheltered corners, tiny shoots of green peeked through patches of softening ground, fragile and promising. A quiet whisper that life persisted even after the harshest winter. Melting snow formed gentle streams along curbs and gutters, weaving patterns across the streets like silver threads. Children paused to watch the water's flow, fascinated by the way it glimmered in sunlight and reflected fragments of the sky. Adults too found comfort in these subtle movements, noting the soothing rhythm of dripping ice and the soft trickle of thawing streams. Each droplet became a reminder that the city, and life within it, was moving forward. Rooftops captured the slow transformation as well. Icicles dripped steadily, forming tiny rainbows where sunlight struck them. Samuel and Clara observed these delicate phenomena, marveling at the quiet beauty hidden within a season so harsh. They listened to the soft flutter of wings, the faint rustle of branches, and the distant murmur of thawing water, allowing the gentle sounds to wash away fatigue and bring a sense of serene reflection. Even the harbor reflected life's return. Thin sheets of ice broke apart slowly, revealing glimmers of dark water beneath. Seagulls and smaller birds cautiously returned, landing on piers and drifting on gentle waves. Sailors moved with steady, deliberate steps, their actions in harmony with nature's gradual reawakening. The harbor's muted sounds, a soft splash here, a distant call there, added to the city's slow, calming rhythm. In these quiet observations, the city and its residents were reminded of resilience, continuity, and gentle renewal. The snow that had seemed all-consuming now became a nurturing blanket, melting to reveal signs of life and promise. Every bird's chirp, every droplet of water, and every budding leaf was a soft reassurance. The storm had passed, nature endured, and the world was slowly, calmly returning to its balanced, soothing rhythm. As the city slowly shook off the storm's icy grip, families and neighbors found comfort in the familiar rhythms of daily life. Kitchens filled with the soft hum of boiling water, the gentle hiss of bread baking, and the quiet clatter of utensils. Parents moved deliberately, stirring pots of stew or tea, tending fires with care, each motion slow and mindful, a soothing reassurance that warmth and nourishment remained steadfast. Children now free to explore without fear, padded softly along cleared hallways and alleys. Boots squished gently in softened snow, and the occasional giggle or whisper floated through rooms and streets. Even in play, movements were deliberate and calm, each step and gesture echoing the careful balance of safety and curiosity that lingered after days of storm-induced caution. Neighbors exchanged greetings at doorways, small but meaningful. A shared loaf of bread, a borrowed blanket, or a quiet invitation to sit by the fire became gestures laden with warmth. Conversations were soft, voices tempered by reflection, recounting moments of shared endurance or simply exchanging updates about the slowly returning city. Each interaction became a thread in a growing tapestry of connection and care. On rooftops, Samuel and Clara continued their watch, not in urgency, but in quiet ritual. The snow beneath their feet had softened, ice had loosened, and each movement was careful, deliberate, almost meditative. They checked chimneys and tarpaulins with a calm attentiveness, taking in the softened light of the sun on melting snow and the gentle glimmer of droplets falling from eaves. Every small task was a quiet affirmation that life went on, that stability and safety could be maintained, and that patience and care mattered. Even the harbor revealed daily rhythms returning in understated ways. Sailors adjusted sails, guided boats along partially thawed piers, and exchanged measured words of encouragement. The soft lapping of water against hulls, the occasional creak of timbers, and the distant calls of returning birds created a gentle, soothing cadence, marking the passage of time and the return of order. In this tapestry of quiet routines, the city's residents discovered a deep, calming satisfaction. Each measured gesture, every shared moment, and every simple task reinforced stability and continuity. Life, though tempered by the storm, had reclaimed a gentle, mindful rhythm, one that allowed hearts and minds to breathe, to reflect, and to rest in the comforting cadence of human care and enduring resilience. In the calm that followed the blizzard, people began noticing small, gentle blessings hidden in their daily surroundings. A mother watched her child's breath swirl in soft clouds as they carefully stepped along thawing sidewalks, and felt a quiet swell of gratitude for their safety. The simple warmth of a stove, the fragrance of fresh bread, or the soft glow of a lantern became treasures, small yet profound reminders of life's enduring comfort. Neighbors lingered in doorways to exchange smiles, their words filled with quiet appreciation. "Thank you for helping clear the snow," one whispered. Another replied, "It was nothing. We all made it through together." These understated exchanges carried weight, grounding everyone in the comforting knowledge that kindness, however small, had sustained them through the storm. On rooftops, Samuel and Clara paused to breathe in the crisp, gentle air. They watched the sunlight refract through melting icicles, casting tiny prisms of color across snow-softened rooftops. Samuel's hand brushed the frost from a railing, and he felt gratitude for the strength that had carried him and others through nights of vigilance. Clara watched the streets below, where children cautiously explored and neighbors shared warmth, and she too felt a quiet, abiding thankfulness for the human bonds that had endured alongside the storm. Even the city itself seemed to offer subtle reminders of resilience. Dripping water traced silver paths along windowsills, sunlight sparkled across softening snow, and the distant hum of life returning carried an almost musical rhythm. Each observation, no matter how small, was a gentle invitation to pause, reflect, and recognize the value of endurance, compassion, and patience. In homes, kitchens, and hallways, people shared these reflective moments, hands clasped over warm mugs, eyes met across tables, and soft laughter arose, not from joy alone, but from the relief and appreciation of survival. Gratitude became both a quiet comfort and a connecting thread, binding neighbors, families, and strangers in a shared acknowledgement that the storm's trials had been weathered, and life had persisted. As the day unfolded, these small reflections of gratitude multiplied. A passerby noticed a bird perched safely on a branch, a child marveled at the patterns of melting snow, a neighbor offered a warm scarf without prompting. Each moment, gentle and deliberate, created a soothing sense of peace and contentment, a quiet celebration of life's continuity and the enduring warmth of human connection. The city, once hushed under the blizzard's grip, began to awaken in measured, deliberate ways. Footsteps returned to the streets, soft at first, hesitant as pedestrians navigated patches of melting snow. The faint creak of wooden carts on cobblestones, once silenced by drifted mounds, now echoed gently, signaling the cautious resumption of commerce. Each sound, subdued yet present, added to a comforting rhythm, a quiet heartbeat marking life's return. Shopkeepers moved carefully, brushing snow from thresholds and opening windows to catch the crisp air. The soft scent of coffee and bread wafted into streets, mingling with the faint, earthy aroma of thawing snow. Neighbors paused to exchange greetings, their voices low but warm, carrying an undercurrent of shared relief and gentle joy. Each smile, nod, or whispered word reinforced the sense of community that had deepened through days of adversity. Children explored cautiously, boots crunching in wet snow, laughter ringing softly as they discovered streams of melted water flowing along the curbs. Tiny droplets splashed onto mittens and coats, leaving fleeting traces of wet warmth. Parents watched from doorways and windows, voices soothing and calm, offering guidance and gentle warnings. Every movement and sound was measured, deliberate, a quiet meditation in motion. Rooftops, cleared and safe, became vantage points for observation and reflection. Samuel and Clara leaned against chimneys, listening to the faint hum of renewed life below. Smoke spiraled lazily from chimneys, birds chirped softly in emerging treetops, and the occasional creak of wood or the gentle drip of melting icicles added to the city's subtle soundtrack. From above, the scene was one of harmony, a delicate balance between human activity and nature's gentle reclamation. Even the harbor, once frozen and silent, now resonated with careful motion. Ferries shifted on partially thawed water, ropes stretched and slackened as sailors moved with steady, deliberate care. Water lapped softly against hulls, carrying the sound of slow renewal. Gulls and smaller birds skimmed along piers, their calls punctuating the harbor's calm rhythm. Every sound was a reminder that life had resumed, slowly but surely, and that patience and care were guiding the city's return to normalcy. As the day continued, these subtle movements and sounds intertwined to create a gentle symphony of awakening. Streets, rooftops, and harbor alike hummed with quiet energy, a soothing reminder that the city, its residents, and even nature itself were reclaiming their rhythm. Each soft step, gentle voice, and trickle of water became part of a calming cadence, welcoming the day with peace, continuity, and quiet assurance. As the city's rhythm returned, its residents discovered small, comforting joys hidden in everyday life. In kitchens, the smell of fresh bread mingled with the faint, crisp aroma of melting snow drifting through open windows. Families lingered over warm meals, savoring the texture of bread, the richness of stew, and the subtle sweetness of tea. Each bite became a gentle celebration, a quiet acknowledgement that survival had brought them to this shared comfort. Children wandered the thawing streets, boots leaving soft imprints in the wet snow. They paused to examine puddles that reflected fragments of sunlight, tracing shapes with gloved fingers and laughing softly at the tiny ripples their movements created. Even simple games, rolling snowballs into gentle slopes or hopping between icy patches, became a meditation, a slow and calming way to reconnect with the world outside. Neighbors continued to exchange quiet words of gratitude and encouragement. A basket of fruit passed from one doorway to another, a warm scarf lent to someone shivering, a helping hand offered to steady a child. These small gestures were infused with a sense of shared relief and tenderness. Each act, seemingly ordinary, radiated warmth, a gentle joy that deepened the bonds forged through days of hardship. Rooftops offered moments of reflection. Samuel and Clara leaned against a chimney, watching sunlight sparkle on melting icicles. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, birds chirped softly, and distant footsteps echoed gently below. Samuel breathed deeply, savoring the serenity, and Clara smiled quietly, feeling the city's pulse of calm, continuity, and resilience. Every detail, the shimmer of snow, the flutter of wings, the murmur of distant voices, added to a sense of gentle wonder. In the harbor, Sailors noticed the subtle beauty in their surroundings as ice receded and water moved freely. Small waves lapped against hulls, gulls swooped gracefully overhead, and the salty tang of sea air mingled with warmth rising from docks. Even routine tasks from securing ropes to adjusting sails were imbued with a sense of calm satisfaction, a slow return to harmony after the storm's relentless disruption. These quiet joys, soft laughter, shared meals, gentle reflections, and delicate observations of nature reminded the city's residents that peace, warmth, and wonder could coexist with survival. Life, resilient and patient, offered moments of beauty in the aftermath, allowing hearts to rest, minds to reflect, and souls to feel the quiet comfort of enduring hope. With the blizzard fully behind them, children and adults alike began to explore the city anew, discovering hidden corners and subtle transformations left by the storm. Streets that had seemed impassable now revealed soft paths between melted snowbanks, where puddles reflected the muted sunlight and shimmered like tiny mirrors. Every turn became a quiet adventure, each step an opportunity to notice what had changed, softened, or emerged from beneath the white blanket. Children crouched near street corners to examine miniature streams formed by melting snow, tracing the water's path with gloved fingers and marveling at the way it wound around stones and debris. They laughed softly at the ripple of water and the sparkle of sunlight bouncing on tiny droplets. Parents watched nearby, their smiles gentle, appreciating both the play and the calm focus that curiosity inspired. Neighbors ventured further as well, examining rooftops, alleys, and courtyards with renewed interest. Snow-laden trees that had bowed under weight now stood straighter, their branches dripping slowly. Birds, emboldened by returning warmth, hopped along rooftops and fences, offering soft, melodic chirps that punctuated the quiet exploration. Even small discoveries, like a lost mitten buried beneath a drift or the delicate pattern of ice crystals on a windowsill, became moments of wonder, reminders of life's delicate beauty. Rooftops offered their own gentle adventures. Samuel and Clara carefully walked along paths cleared of ice, observing the city from above. The melting snow created tiny rivulets that caught sunlight, turning into shimmering veins of silver across rooftops. They spotted pigeons returning to familiar ledges and noticed the faint hum of life awakening in previously silent streets. Every sight, sound, and movement felt deliberate, calm, and restorative, a meditation in observation. Even the harbor invited quiet exploration. Ferries moved slowly through thawing water, and sailors guided small boats to safer areas. Children watching from docks noted how ice sheets fractured and floated gently downstream, creating patterns in the water that seemed almost magical. Each sound, the soft lap of water, the distant cry of gulls, the creak of timber, added layers of calm to the experience, grounding observers in the gentle rhythm of the post-storm world. Through these soft discoveries, the city's residents and visitors alike reconnected with their surroundings. Curiosity became a soothing companion, guiding them to notice beauty in small details, to move slowly and deliberately, and to find calm delight in the gentle unfolding of life after the storm's harshness. Each step, each glance, each quiet observation was a meditation, a way to savor the returning world and its soft, restorative rhythms. As the city settled into its softened rhythm, families and neighbors embraced small rituals of comfort, finding warmth and calm in simple shared experiences. Evenings became a gentle sanctuary after the storm, with lamps casting golden light across snow-dusted streets visible through frost-laced windows. Inside homes, the smell of simmering tea, freshly baked bread, and warm soups created a comforting cocoon that contrasted with the lingering chill outside. Neighbors gathered in quiet groups, sometimes in hallways or small kitchens, to share stories of the blizzard's trials. Voices were soft, reflective, and filled with gentle laughter, creating a soothing harmony that eased lingering tension. Children listened, captivated by tales of courage and kindness, while adults found reassurance in the quiet camaraderie. Each shared moment reinforced connection, patience, and the enduring warmth of human care. Families engaged in familiar evening routines with renewed gratitude. Parents wrapped children in soft blankets, hummed lullabies, or read stories aloud, their tones deliberate, calm, and soothing. The subtle crackle of firewood in stoves, the occasional pop of steam from teapots, and the muted sound of footsteps on thawing floors added layers of gentle ambiance, grounding everyone in the slow rhythm of domestic life. On rooftops, Samuel and Clara observed the quiet city below as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Shadows stretched across streets and rooftops, highlighting patterns formed by melting snow and icicles. They paused to sip warm tea, enjoying the delicate aroma and comforting heat. The gentle sounds of distant footsteps, birds settling for the night, and the soft lapping of harbor waters created a tranquil symphony, perfect for reflection and unwinding. Even the harbor held its own peaceful rituals. Sailors checked boats one last time, securing ropes and adjusting tarps with deliberate care. Small fires for warmth flickered against winter-darkened piers, and the occasional low whistle of returning birds punctuated the calm evening air. The combination of gentle sounds, soft light, and shared purpose created a reassuring sense of continuity, reminding everyone that life could be steady, calm, and restorative after turmoil. Through these shared comforts, the city's residents found both emotional and physical warmth. Each small ritual, sipping tea, sharing stories, observing gentle changes, or wrapping a child in blankets, became an anchor in the post-storm world, a way to honor survival, nurture connection, and invite peace. The day ended not with rush or anxiety, but with calm reflection, quiet joy, and gentle preparation for rest. As twilight settled over the city, a soft hush replaced the faint hum of returning activity. Snow-dusted rooftops glimmered in the fading light, and the golden glow of lamps spilled gently onto thawing streets. Families gathered in quiet rooms, wrapping themselves in warmth and reflection, savoring the calm after days of relentless storm and struggle. Parents held children close, tracing soft patterns on blankets, and whispered gentle reassurances that the storm had passed. The subtle aroma of warm soup, tea, and fresh bread enveloped rooms, blending with the faint, earthy scent of melting snow wafting through open windows. Every detail, the flicker of candlelight, the gentle crackle of a fire, the muffled sound of footsteps outside, contributed to a soothing rhythm, signaling safety and continuity. Neighbors paused at doorways or along cleared streets to exchange soft words of reflection. "We made it," one murmured, voice low but steady. "Yes," replied another, "and we saw so much kindness." Even these brief exchanges carried depth, reminding all that resilience was measured not just in survival, but in shared moments of care and understanding. Rooftops offered a quiet vantage point for contemplation. Samuel and Clara leaned against a chimney, observing the city's slow transition from day to night. The melting snow glimmered faintly under the dimming light, and the gentle drip of icicles created tiny calming rhythms. Smoke curled softly from chimneys, and distant birds settled for the night, their last calls blending with the faint lapping of water in the harbor. Each sound, each sight became a meditation, a gentle reminder that the city, and life within it, continued with patience and grace. Even the harbor, now quieter, reflected the day's gentle close. Boats rested in partially thawed water, swaying slowly with the tide. Sailors completed final checks with deliberate care, and the soft echo of ropes, creaking timbers, and distant gulls created a soothing harmony. The interplay of water, ice, and soft light offered a serene conclusion to the day, reinforcing the city's resilience and the quiet beauty of life resuming after hardship. As evening deepened, the city seemed to exhale collectively. Windows glowed with soft light, voices grew quieter, and the streets, softened by snow and reflection, welcomed stillness. Residents, whether nestled in homes, observing from rooftops, or walking along gentle paths, felt a calming sense of completion, a slow readiness for rest, and a deep gratitude for enduring the storm together. Nightfall descended gently upon the city, softening every edge and smoothing the remnants of snow-laden streets. The fading light left behind a calm twilight, where shadows stretched and intertwined with the glow of lanterns flickering in windows. A hush settled over rooftops, alleys, and courtyards, a quiet blanket that invited reflection, rest, and gentle breathing. Families drew close together, finding warmth in shared blankets, the flicker of firelight, and the subtle aromas of evening meals lingering in kitchens. Children rested against parents' sides, listening to soft whispers of reassurance and stories of the day's small triumphs. The world outside, though still cool and damp with melting snow, seemed safely distant, framed by glowing windows and the muted sparkle of frost along ledges. Rooftops, once arenas of vigilance during the storm, now offered serenity. Samuel and Clara leaned against chimneys, their breaths forming soft clouds in the crisp night air. Icicles glimmered in moonlight, dripping gently, each tiny drop producing a faint, calming rhythm. The distant murmur of the harbor, the occasional rustle of a bird settling for the night, and the faint echo of footsteps on thawed streets combined to form a soothing, meditative chorus. Even in the harbor, the city's pulse slowed. Boats swayed gently in the thawed water, ropes creaked softly as sails adjusted to night breezes, and gulls murmured faintly before roosting. The mixture of soft sounds, dim lights, and reflective water created a lullaby unique to the post-storm city, a natural symphony of calm, patience, and quiet endurance. Within homes, small rituals of comfort continued. The faint hum of conversation, the soft crackle of fires, and the gentle clink of teacups harmonized with the night. Residents reflected on the day's slow recovery, the kindness they had witnessed, and the subtle beauty emerging from the thawing city. Gratitude filled rooms, hearts, and minds, creating a deep sense of peace that settled alongside the physical warmth of blankets, lamps, and hearths. Nightfall became more than darkness. It became a gentle embrace. It held the city tenderly, offering calm after struggle, a pause to rest, and a quiet invitation to surrender to sleep. The snow, softened and glimmering, reflected moonlight in gentle shards, while streets, rooftops, and harbors exhaled slowly, letting life settle into a measured, soothing rhythm. As darkness deepened, the city transformed into a dreamlike landscape. Snow-covered rooftops shimmered under the moon's pale glow, each flake catching light and creating delicate patterns that seemed to dance across tiles and ledges. Streets, softened by melting snow, reflected lamplight like gentle ribbons of gold, guiding the eye along winding paths that invited quiet exploration and imagination. Families nestled in homes, their breathing slow and steady. Children's eyes fluttered with the onset of sleep, minds wandering through gentle dreams of snowflakes, glimmering icicles, and softly flowing streams. Parents watched quietly, hearts warmed by the peaceful rhythm of household sounds, the soft crackle of a fire, the murmur of conversation fading, the occasional pop of a kettle cooling, each note a lullaby of calm and continuity. From rooftops, Samuel and Clara observed the city with reflective stillness. The harbor mirrored the moonlight, water rippling faintly with the slow drift of ice sheets. Birds, roosting for the night, created soft silhouettes against the sky. The combination of light, shadow, and movement lent the city an ethereal quality, a serene balance between the tangible and the imagined. Every detail invited patience, quiet observation, and a gentle surrender to calm. Even the smallest motions seemed significant in this dreamscape. A distant lantern swayed lightly in a soft breeze, snowflakes glinted in its glow, and the muted creak of a wooden shutter echoed like a soft note in a slow melody. Footsteps, when they occurred, were deliberate and quiet, merging seamlessly with the natural rhythm of nighttime, the subtle lap of water against piers, the faint rustle of settling branches, and the whisper of wind across thawing streets. Residents reflected on these gentle scenes, feeling gratitude for survival, kindness, and the slow unfolding of life after the storm. Their thoughts drifted easily, mingling with dreams of soft snow, sparkling rooftops, and the calm persistence of nature and humanity alike. The city's nightscape became a cocoon, a space where eyes could close, hearts could rest, and minds could drift freely into imagination and sleep. In the stillness of deep night, the city breathed softly, as though exhaling the weight of the storm. Streets lay hushed, glistening faintly with lingering snow and melting puddles. Rooftops shimmered under the gentle gaze of the moon, and the harbor's dark waters reflected silver streaks where ice had begun to melt. Every element, the city, nature, and its residents, moved in quiet synchrony, a subtle, calming harmony. Inside homes, families slumbered under soft blankets, their breathing slow and even. The faint aroma of lingering meals, combined with the soft warmth of fires, created a cocoon of comfort. Children dreamed gently, their imaginations carrying them over snow-covered streets, through glimmering alleyways, and across rooftops dusted with moonlight. Each dream was a reflection of resilience, connection, and the enduring calm after hardship. From high above, Samuel and Clara observed the quiet city. They listened to the distant drip of icicles, the soft rustle of settling branches, and the occasional call of a night bird returning to its perch. Each sound intertwined with the faint hum of urban life. An open window, a muffled footstep, a soft creak of a shutter, and formed a delicate tapestry of life's subtle continuities. The city itself seemed to pulse gently, alive yet tranquil, a living reflection of patience and enduring hope. Even in the harbor, subtle movements connected nature and humanity. Ice sheets shifted slowly with the tide, water lapped softly against piers, and gulls rested silently on quiet boats. Sailors long at rest had left small lights glowing along docks, offering gentle guidance to those moving through the night. The interplay of water, light, and shadow created a soothing, reflective rhythm, tying together the natural world and human presence in a quiet, harmonious lullaby. In these hours, every resident, every creature, and every element of the city felt part of a larger, interconnected calm. The lingering effects of the storm had woven lessons of care, patience, and attentiveness into daily life. Now, as night deepened, these lessons transformed into a comforting embrace, a gentle reminder that despite hardship, the world continued, softly, patiently, and with enduring beauty. As the night lingered, a subtle shift in the sky signaled the first hints of dawn. Deep indigo softened to muted shades of lavender and silver, and the faint glow of light brushed against the edges of rooftops, illuminating melting snow with a delicate shimmer. The city, still hushed, seemed to pause and breathe in harmony with this gentle transformation. Inside homes, the first rays filtered through frost-laced windows, casting soft patterns on walls, floors, and blankets. Children stirred gently, cozy under the warmth of quilts, while parents watched with quiet smiles. The soft aroma of simmering tea and warm bread mingled with the crisp, cool scent of melting snow drifting in through open windows, signaling a new day while maintaining the calm of night's embrace. Rooftops glimmered under the emerging light. Samuel and Clara observed the transformation with gentle awe. Icicles dripped slowly, the droplets catching the soft light and scattering tiny rainbows across the snow. Birds, encouraged by the growing brightness, chirped faintly from their perches, adding a delicate melody to the quiet streets below. Even the faint ripple of water in the harbor seemed to reflect the sky's emerging colors, moving in slow, reflective patterns that invited meditation. In the streets, snowbanks softened further, and puddles reflected the subtle glow of early morning. Footsteps occasionally broke the calm, soft and deliberate, as those rising early began gentle routines. The muted hum of the city's slow awakening harmonized with natural sounds, the flutter of wings, the rustle of trees, and the distant creak of rooftops adjusting to melting ice. Together, these elements created a soothing, reflective cadence, bridging night and day in perfect serenity. Residents felt the quiet reassurance of continuity in this liminal hour. Each breath, each step, and each soft sound became part of a larger rhythm, reminding everyone that the storm had passed and life persisted in patient, gentle cycles. Gratitude for warmth, safety, and simple daily rituals filled the hearts of all who noticed, and the city, still wrapped in calm, seemed to embrace each person with a quiet, nurturing energy. With dawn spreading softly across the city, residents began their first gentle morning routines. Kitchens filled with the quiet hiss of water boiling for tea and the soft rustle of flour as bread was kneaded. Steam curled upward, carrying warm, comforting aromas that blended with the crisp scent of snow melting outside. Each sound and smell created a calming rhythm, a subtle promise of nourishment and continuity. Children stretched beneath soft blankets, their breaths mingling with the faint warmth of sunlight spilling through frost-laced windows. Parents moved deliberately, preparing breakfast, tending fires, and guiding little feet over puddles softened by melting snow. Every step, every motion was measured and gentle, designed to maintain safety while embracing the slow, comforting start of a new day. Neighbors ventured outside cautiously, brushing residual snow from coats and boots. They exchanged greetings in hushed tones, sharing smiles and small tokens of kindness. A loaf of bread, a warm scarf, or a brief word of encouragement. The city streets, still glistening with melting snow and faint reflections of sunlight, seemed alive yet calm, each movement harmonizing with the quiet energy of the awakening day. Rooftops revealed delicate patterns of thawing snow and ice. Samuel and Clara moved slowly, observing the sunlight catching tiny droplets and scattering them like diamonds across slanted tiles. Birds hopped from ledge to ledge, chirping softly, and smoke spiraled lazily from chimneys. Even the harbor reflected the gradual resurgence of life. Boats shifted gently with the tide, and water lapped against piers in a soothing, steady rhythm. The city's first morning routines were not hurried but deliberate, filled with mindfulness and care. Breakfast, warm drinks, and small household tasks became meditative rituals, encouraging calm reflection and appreciation for survival. Each resident, whether inside a cozy home or moving carefully through softened streets, participated in a gentle cadence of renewal, an embrace of life's small, restorative rhythms that invited peace and a lingering sense of comfort. As the morning progressed, the city came fully to life, yet with a softness and deliberation that contrasted sharply with the storm's former chaos. Streets shimmered with melting snow, reflecting the gentle sunlight and the occasional glint of ice, creating a quiet, almost magical atmosphere. Pedestrians moved slowly, boots leaving wet imprints, and carriages creaked softly as they navigated the softened cobblestones. Neighbors paused in doorways and along sidewalks to exchange greetings, their voices low and warm. Small acts of care, offering a helping hand to steady a child, sharing a wrapped loaf of bread, or lending a scarf to ward off lingering chill, filled the air with gentle energy. Every gesture, no matter how slight, seemed amplified in significance after days of storm and hardship. Children explored the city with cautious curiosity, tracing the paths of melting snow, observing small streams running along curbs, and marveling at the sparkling ice still clinging to tree branches. Their laughter, soft and playful, harmonized with the delicate rustle of leaves, the distant drip of icicles, and the faint hum of awakening commerce. It was a chorus of life tempered by calm, a gentle symphony of discovery and continuity. Rooftops revealed subtle movements as well. Samuel and Clara walked carefully along cleared paths, observing the city's soft awakening from above. Smoke rose in thin, lazy spirals from chimneys, birds hopped between rooftops, and the sunlight caught the melting icicles in sparkling patterns. Every detail, the shimmer of snow, the flutter of wings, the muted clatter of a cart, offered moments of reflection and gentle wonder. Even the harbor contributed to the city's calm awakening. Ferries shifted slowly in the thawed water, ropes creaked gently, and sailors moved with measured steps. The subtle lap of water against hulls and the soft call of gulls created a soothing rhythmic soundscape. Observers could feel the connection between human movement and natural rhythms, a comforting reminder that life, patience, and care all work together to restore balance and serenity. In this fully awakened city, every resident, every bird, every ripple in the water participated in a slow, deliberate dance. Life had returned, not with urgency but with mindfulness, reflection, and gentle appreciation. Each soft sound, each subtle motion, each shared smile reinforced a sense of calm, connection, and enduring hope. A perfect setting for reflection, rest, and quiet contemplation. By mid-morning, the city basked in soft sunlight, glimmering across puddles and softened snowbanks. Streets were alive with quiet, deliberate movement. Neighbors walked carefully along cleared paths, children explored small nooks and streams formed by melting snow, and the occasional carriage rolled slowly over the wet cobblestones, its wooden wheels creaking gently, Every motion carried a gentle rhythm, soothing and reflective, perfectly suited for contemplation and calm observation. Children paused frequently, crouching to examine tiny water channels winding between stones. They marveled at how sunlight glimmered on droplets, tracing intricate patterns across the street. Parents lingered nearby, voices soft and guiding, encouraging curiosity while ensuring safety. The occasional laugh or whisper rose above the muted city sounds, harmonizing with the gentle drip of melting icicles and the distant murmur of traffic returning to life. Neighbors embraced small adventures as well. A woman stepped carefully onto a snow-softened bridge to inspect delicate ice patterns on its rails. A man ventured along an alley to observe the subtle shimmer of frost on windowsills. Each action, though simple, offered a quiet meditation, a chance to pause, notice beauty in detail, and connect with both the natural world and fellow citizens in gentle harmony. From rooftops, Samuel and Clara observed these tiny adventures with reflective calm. Children's laughter echoed faintly. Birds flitted from perch to perch, and soft rays of sunlight highlighted intricate patterns in snow and ice. The harbor shimmered quietly in the background, boats shifting slowly with gentle ripples, water catching the soft light, and gulls calling softly before settling nearby. Every detail combined into a serene mosaic of life, slowly, deliberately returning to normal. Even small sounds, boots pressing through melting snow, doors opening gently, water trickling from rooftops, added layers of sensory calm. Observers could feel the pulse of the city, steady yet subdued, a reminder that life continued with patience, reflection, and quiet joy. The storm had passed, but its lessons lingered. Careful observation, appreciation for simple beauty, and mindful interaction with both nature and community created a deeply comforting rhythm. Through these mid-morning discoveries, residents found both reflection and gentle delight. Every tiny exploration, every shared observation, and every whispered moment of wonder became a meditation, a way to savor life's slow, restorative return and to nurture a calm, grounded sense of presence. As the day moved toward late morning, the city embraced a gentle, measured rhythm. Sunlight streamed across rooftops and streets, casting soft reflections on puddles and damp cobblestones. The air carried a delicate mix of melted snow, earth, and faint smoke from chimneys, creating a comforting, grounding scent that wrapped around the city like a warm, invisible blanket. Neighbors moved slowly along streets, exchanging quiet words and smiles. One gentleman paused to help a child navigate a slippery patch, while a woman offered fresh bread to a neighbor passing by. Each small interaction, though unhurried, radiated warmth, reinforcing the sense of community that had deepened in the days following the storm. The city's life seemed infused with care, patience, and gentle connection. Children continued to explore with quiet curiosity. They noticed tiny buds peeking from snow-softened earth, delicate patterns formed by melting frost on windowsills, and puddles that mirrored the soft sky above. Laughter was muted but joyous, blending harmoniously with subtle city sounds, the distant murmur of carts on wet streets, the gentle drip of melting icicles, and the soft rustle of tree branches in a light breeze. Rooftops provided moments of serene observation. Samuel and Clara moved with mindful care, noting the way sunlight caught glimmering icicles and traced shadows along softened snow. Birds flitted across rooftops, their gentle calls adding a melodic layer to the city's quiet symphony. Even the harbor reflected calm activity. Boats rocked slowly in thawing waters, sails creaked faintly, and gulls skimmed gracefully across the soft waves, their cries delicate and unobtrusive. Inside homes, residents continued with slow, soothing routines. Tea was poured, bread was buttered, and warm meals were shared with calm conversation. The soft crackle of fires, the faint hum of voices, and the subtle movement of daily tasks created an immersive, comforting soundtrack. Every moment encouraged reflection, mindfulness, and a gentle appreciation for survival, community, and the city's soft resurgence after hardship. In this late morning calm, life unfolded with patience, care, and quiet beauty. Every small gesture, every attentive movement, and every subtle observation of the city's gentle transformations reinforced a soothing rhythm. a perfect balance of reflection, calm activity, and immersive presence that invited both heart and mind to rest and relax. As the sun climbed higher, the city basked in a gentle, warming light. Snowbanks glistened faintly, gradually giving way to patches of exposed cobblestone and soil. The air carried a subtle sweetness from melted snow, mingling with the earthy scent of damp earth, creating a calm, grounding aroma that invited slow, deep breaths and mindful presence. Residents ventured outdoors with quiet deliberation, enjoying the sun's warmth on their faces and the soft, wet crunch of snow beneath their boots. Children dipped hands into shallow puddles, marveling at the ripples that shimmered with sunlight, while parents watched nearby, offering gentle guidance and quiet reassurance. Every movement was mindful, every glance attuned to the subtle beauty of the day. Neighbors paused to share small gestures of connection. A woman handed a steaming cup of tea through an open doorway. A man offered a comforting smile to someone passing by. Even brief interactions radiated warmth, bridging the space between individuals with kindness and gentle awareness. Each act, though simple, carried significance amplified by the shared experience of enduring the storm together. Rooftops caught the sunlight in delicate patterns. Samuel and Clara leaned against a chimney, feeling the warmth soak through their coats. Icicles reflected sunlight in soft prisms, droplets falling quietly to the melting snow below. Birds flitted among rooftops and chimneys, their faint calls weaving seamlessly with the soft sounds of footsteps, distant carts, and the gentle flow of water in the harbor. The world seemed to hum in harmony, a delicate interplay of natural beauty and human presence. Even the harbor reflected the afternoon's soft warmth. Boats shifted slightly in thawing water, gulls skimmed low above gentle waves, and sailors moved with careful steps across slick docks. The mixture of sunlit water, glinting ice, and muted activity created a soothing, immersive scene, reminding observers that the world, though tested, continued in gentle balance. In this early afternoon calm, residents felt an intimate connection with both nature and community. Each sunlit puddle, every warm breeze, and each soft interaction reinforced the quiet rhythm of life returning. The day unfolded slowly, deliberately and soothingly, offering comfort, mindfulness, and a soft sense of joy that lingered in hearts, minds, and the peaceful sunlit city around them. As the sun began its slow descent, the city's light softened into warm, muted tones. Snowbanks shimmered faintly, reflecting gold and amber hues, while puddles mirrored the sky's gentle gradient from soft blue to pale orange. Streets carried a quiet energy, with footsteps and distant cartwheels blending into a steady, soothing rhythm that marked the day's calm progression. Families lingered in outdoor spaces, appreciating the waning sunlight. Children paused to examine shimmering patches of ice, tracing delicate patterns with gloved fingers, while parents observed with gentle smiles, feeling gratitude for the day's safety and warmth. Every glance, every laugh, and every soft word contributed to a meditative atmosphere, allowing hearts and minds to rest in quiet reflection. Neighbors exchanged serene greetings and small acts of kindness. A shared loaf of bread, a careful step offered to someone crossing a slick path, or a brief, thoughtful conversation infused the streets with a sense of connection and mindfulness. Each interaction, gentle and unhurried, reminded everyone of the subtle, enduring bonds that had carried them through the storm. Rooftops glimmered in late afternoon light, Samuel and Clara observing with calm attentiveness. Icicles, catching the sun's final rays, scattered tiny prisms across snow-softened tiles. Birds flitted between chimneys, calling softly before settling for the approaching evening. From above, the city seemed suspended in a delicate balance between lingering daylight and the quiet promise of night, offering a sense of harmony and gentle continuity. Even the harbor reflected this soothing transition. Boats swayed slowly in thawed water lapping gently against piers, and gulls called softly before settling into roosts. The mixture of warm light, reflective water, and subdued movement created a lull in activity, a peaceful interlude that mirrored the city's overall rhythm and invited calm, introspective observation. In these late afternoon moments, residents embraced the day's end with gratitude and mindfulness, Every subtle gesture, quiet observation, and shared smile reinforced a comforting sense of stability, community, and gentle hope. The city seemed to exhale, preparing for the approach of evening while every heart and mind settled into the soothing cadence of life continuing, calm and reflective. As the sun dipped lower, the city was bathed in a soft amber glow, casting long, gentle shadows across streets, rooftops, and thawing snow. Light shimmered on puddles and ice, creating fleeting reflections that seemed almost magical. The air carried the subtle warmth of fading sunlight, mingling with the lingering scent of melting snow, wood smoke, and the faint aroma of evening meals preparing indoors. Residents moved with deliberate calm, finishing outdoor tasks and gathering for cozy evening routines. Children ran briefly across softened streets before returning to the warmth of home, their laughter soft and rhythmic. Parents moved slowly, tending fires, preparing meals, or guiding children into blankets, the motions deliberate and soothing. Each movement contributed to the serene cadence of a city winding gently toward night. Neighbors paused to exchange soft words and gestures of connection. A shared smile, a warm greeting, or the careful lending of a tool for a small task created a tapestry of quiet community care. These small interactions, gentle and unhurried, reinforced bonds strengthened through the storm, reminding everyone of human resilience and the warmth of thoughtful attention. Rooftops glowed with the final rays of sunlight. Samuel and Clara leaned against a chimney, observing patterns of melting snow glinting like jewels across the city. Birds returned to perches, their soft calls mingling with the faint creak of wood, distant footsteps, and the gentle trickle of water from melting icicles. From above, the city appeared suspended in a peaceful balance, between the end of day and the onset of night, between human movement and nature's calm presence. The harbor, too, reflected the early evening's tranquility. Boats shifted slowly in the water, ropes creaked faintly, and the gentle lap of waves against piers created a rhythmic, soothing backdrop. Seagulls settled, their wings folding quietly as the light faded, and the air carried the faint, briny scent of water mixed with sun-warmed stone and wood. The harbor's subtle sounds harmonized with the city's overall quiet, establishing a slow, meditative cadence. In this early evening glow, every resident, bird, and ripple of water participated in a gentle transition. Life moved deliberately, thoughtfully, and with care, inviting reflection, appreciation, and calm. The city, softened by light and memory, prepared for night, while every heart and home settled into a slow, comforting rhythm of warmth, safety, and quiet presence. As night fully descended, the city became a gentle tapestry of shadows and soft light. Lanterns flickered along streets, their golden glow reflecting in patches of melted snow and puddles, casting warm pools of illumination on cobblestones. The faint aroma of wood smoke drifted from chimneys, mingling with the crisp scent of the cooling evening air. The city exhaled, and in that breath a deep, restorative calm spread through every street and home. Families gathered close, savoring the final moments of wakefulness. Children nestled under soft blankets, listening to the gentle crackle of fires, the distant murmur of conversation, and the occasional drip of water from melting icicles. Parents shared quiet words, warm drinks, and subtle gestures of care, each movement slow, deliberate, and infused with tenderness. Every sensory detail, the flicker of firelight, the warmth of a blanket, the faint taste of tea, worked together to soothe and settle minds for rest. On rooftops, Samuel and Clara observed the city with reflective serenity. The harbor shimmered faintly under moonlight, boats resting peacefully as water lapped gently against piers. Birds were silent now, wings folded, resting in hidden perches. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant echo of footsteps, and the occasional creak of timber combined into a slow, meditative rhythm, offering reassurance and a sense of continuity. Neighborhoods were hushed yet alive with subtle sounds. A cat padded quietly along a snow-softened path. A neighbor whispered a soft greeting to someone passing by. A dog barked faintly in the distance before settling. Each gentle noise added texture to the city's quiet symphony, a lullaby of survival, connection, and calm presence. In this embrace of evening, the city felt protective, tender, and patient. Every street, rooftop, and harbor reflected the day's gentle recovery, the small acts of care, and the shared resilience of its people. Life moved deliberately, softly, and beautifully, allowing every heart, home, and soul to settle into a rhythm of peace. The city had fully surrendered tonight, wrapped in a serene, protective hush. Lanterns cast warm pools of light that glimmered softly on melting snow, and the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with the cool, crisp air. The streets were empty, but alive with subtle sounds. The quiet drip of icicles, the gentle rustle of leaves in the night breeze, and the soft lap of water in the harbor, all forming a slow, soothing symphony of life at rest. Inside homes, families were tucked under blankets, the warmth of fires and soft meals lingering in every corner. Children's breathing was calm even, blending with the rhythm of the household. Parents lingered for a moment, savoring the peace, and shared quiet smiles of relief and gratitude. Each detail, the flicker of candlelight, the faint aroma of tea, the soft touch of a hand, offered a gentle comfort, reminding hearts that safety, warmth, and care had returned after the storm's trials. From the rooftops, Samuel and Clara looked upon the city one last time. Shadows deepened, rooftops glimmered faintly under moonlight, and the harbor mirrored the night sky in tranquil ripples. Birds were silent, and distant sounds were rare and gentle. Every movement, every reflection, every tiny shimmer of light spoke of resilience, harmony, and quiet endurance. The city itself seemed to exhale, a slow, deliberate release of tension and activity. Life had survived the storm, and now it rested, cradled by gentle night. Residents, nature, and even the built environment existed in a soft balance, a lullaby of continuity, care, and patient serenity. As you listen to this story, feel the warmth, calm, and gentle rhythm of the city envelop you. Let your thoughts drift like snowflakes settling softly, like the slow, reflective waves in the harbor, like the quiet footsteps along glistening streets. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and allow the peace of the post-blizzard city to carry you into deep, restorative sleep. Thank you for joining this journey through the great blizzard of 1888. May your dreams be gentle, your mind calm, and your heart warm. Good night.